I think Gerard's retirement started early, Martin.
Yeah. Gerard, can you hear me? I think it's 4 o'clock in any case, so I suppose we should start. Okay. Very good afternoon to all my fellow councillors and all the officers present. I'm genuinely pleased to see you all again, albeit remotely. You know, meetings can be funny. Some are very civil and polite, but others turn out to be acrimonious and deeply unpleasant. But that's enough about my home life. We've got a pretty full agenda here, so let's get started. Apologies, Sharon, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Provost, we have an apology from Councillor Jackson, and I'm just looking through the faces, and I think the only other councillor who's not here is Councillor Nelson, but I haven't had his apologies, so I'm not sure if he's going to be joining the meeting or not, but certainly I think everyone else is here.
Thanks very much. Any declarations of interest on any of the agenda items?
Yes, Provost, Councillor Christopher McElhaney. I'll declare an interest. It's on my register of interest, and I'm a member of Unite the Trade Union, which is relevant to the motion submitted about universal credit, because the template is provided by Unite Community, but I don't obviously see that as an interest that obviously forbids me from taking part in the debate through the virtue that I've obviously submitted the motion.
Very much, Christopher.
I'll also declare an interest as a member of the Unite Union. Yeah. Councillor Moran.
Councillor Moran too.
Yes, I'm the same as well, Provost.
Sorry, that was you, Natasha?
Yes, that's me, thank you.
No, are you declaring an interest?
I am a member of Unite, the trade union, yes.
Jim,
and myself, Provost, since we're all doing it, I may as well declare as well.
Yeah, right, okay. So that is the sum total of all the declarations of interest, I take it. Good. We'll now proceed to the minutes of meetings of the Inverclyde Council committees, subcommittees and boards. The appointment panel, Head of Legal Services, 25th of November 2020.
I'll move this as a true record, Provost.
Thanks, Jim. The Inverclyde Council, 3rd of December 2020. I declare that this is a true record. Page 226, 227, 228, 229, 230, 231, and 232 and 233. I've already moved it as a true record. The General Purposes Board, 9th of December 2020. Gerard.
I'll move this as a true record, Provost.
Thank you. 234. And the Environment and Regeneration Committee, 17th of December 2020. Michael.
I move this as a true record, Provost.
Thank you. 235, 236 and 237. The Appointment Panel, Head of Legal Services, Jim.
I'll move this as a true record, Provost.
Thank you, Jim. Page 238. Planning Board, the 6th of January 2021. As David quite properly declared interest, and wasn't present for the whole meeting, I'm going to go to Jim.
Yeah, I'll declare this as a true record, Provost.
Thank you, Jim. Page 1, page 2, page 3. The Policy and Resources Committee, 7th of January 2021. Stephen.
Yeah, I move the minutes of True Record, Provost. Thank you.
Page 4 and page 5. The Health and Social Care Committee, 7th of January 2021. Robert.
I move this to record, Provost. There's a bit of a problem there. I hope you can hear me all right.
Yes, yes, we can. Yeah. Thank you, Robert. Page 6, page 7, page 8, and page 9. The Audit Committee, 12th of January 2021. Channel.
No coming in.
Yes, yes. We're getting audio.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
A True Record, Provost.
Thank you very much, Channel. Page 10. The Environment and Regeneration Committee, 14th of January 2021. Michael.
I move this to True Record, Provost.
Thank you, Michael. Page 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 17, 18, and 19. The Education and Communities Committee, 19th of January 2021. Jim.
I'll move this as a True Record, Provost.
Thank you, Jim. Page 20 and 21. The Human Resources Appeals Board, 26th of January 2021. Jim.
I'll move this as a True Record, Provost.
Page 22. Page 20. Page 22 only. The Policy and Resources Committee, the 2nd of February 2021. Stephen.
I move the minutes of True Record, Provost.
Page 23 and page 24. Planning Board, 3rd of February 2021. David. David.
I don't think so. Not me.
It says in my minutes that you presided on
The 3rd of February.
On the 3rd of February.
You said the appointment panel.
No, Planning Board.
Oh, well,
Is that a true record, David? Can't hear
very
you.
much a True Record for the second time.
Thanks very much, David. Not at all, not at all. Page 25 and page 26. The Local Police and Fire Scrutiny Committee, 4th of February 2021. Tommy.
I move this a True Record, Provost.
Pages 27 and 28. General Purpose Board, February 2021. Jared.
I move this to True Record, Provost.
Page 29 and page 30. So, we can proceed to item 3.
Provost, there's quite a lot of background noise. If everybody could go on mute, please.
Mine isn't switching off. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's not switching off.
Right, I'll carry on and maybe you'll get your IT consultants to work on that channel. In any case, this is item 3 is the budget update and approval of the 2021-22 B and D council tax. As has been the case in the last 5 years, the council will separate approval of council tax today from finalising the budget details on the 18th of March. Alan, would you like to speak to the report?
Thank you, Provost, and good afternoon, everybody. The report provides an update on the current position of the 2021-23 revenue budget position post the 28th of January draft budget settlement that was announced in the Scottish Parliament. It seeks approval for a small number of savings and adjustments that are listed in Appendix 1. It seeks approval for the level of council tax, Band D council tax for the financial year 2021-22, and the report highlights the potential for the council to access a £1.198 million grant should it freeze the council tax. And Appendix 2, which was issued this morning to members, shows that the estimated 21-22 funding gap of £859,000 for next year based on a freezing of the council tax and access to the grant. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Now, are there any, before I ask Stephen to speak as council leader, are there any questions on technical aspects of the budget update for Alan?
Yeah, Provost.
Graham?
Thanks very much. Yeah, just if we can clarify it, 7.5, Alan's put in details about Scottish Water and the changes there. I just want to see if there's any great relevance to that. I just wonder if there's a computer issue. Scottish Water send their own rates. So I just wonder if there's anything in that statement that I don't understand. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Provost, and through you. Yep, obviously with the council tax bill, it's a combined council tax and water bill. And this is a change that we have to implement following a decision that's been taken by the Scottish Parliament to increase the potential discount that individuals will get on their Scottish Water bill. So I felt it was worthwhile highlighting that to members, because quite often, understandably, members of the public don't differentiate between their council tax bill and the water element of it. They just view it all as a council tax bill.
Okay. If there are any further, Christopher.
Obviously, Mr. Puckett, obviously your regular financial updates are very detailed and important to members in terms of how they make decisions. I was wondering if you could pass comment on how you feel the draft budget is in terms of the money coming in Inverclyde compared to what you had predicted before Christmas.
Through you, Provost, as is stated in the report, the settlement represented a 0.9% cash growth at a national level and represented about a 0.8% growth at a local level, and that's cash growth. And that's after years where we've tended to be either flat cash or had a cash cut. So from that perspective, it's an improvement. But as is stated in the report, our inflationary pressures and demand pressures come to about £5.3 million compared to the £1.2 million that this cash growth would generate. So it is better, but the council would still have to make budget cuts of the order of about £4 million or increase council tax to meet the estimated funding shortfall.
Christopher, do you think, are you quite happy with that answer?
I'm quite content with that answer. Thank you, Provost.
Thanks very much, Christopher. Stephen, would you like to move?
Yeah, thanks, Provost. It is my intention to move the recommendations contained in the report. I'll obviously invite Councillor Clocker to second it, but before I do, I obviously want to say a few words. The draft budget settlement for local government announced by the Cabinet Secretary for Finance on the 28th of January was, to put it mildly, disappointing. And just because it isn't as bad as in prior years doesn't make it a good or fair settlement. And obviously issued you information today from COSLA in terms of their latest view on the budget. So for revenue, the overall cash increase for core services of £94 million, or just 0.9%, falls £362 million short of what COSLA asked for on behalf of all its representative political groups. The cost to local government of matching the Scottish Government's pay policy for our workforce alone would cost us more than double the £94 million currently on the table. And when it comes to Inverclyde, the 1.2 million, or just 0.75% increase in non-ring-fence funding has to be measured against 5.3 million of inflationary and demographic pressures, including the demands for a fair settlement from our workforce who have shown such dedication and commitment during the past 12 months. The grant settlement from the Scottish Government represents another real terms reduction in our funding that will ultimately lead to further cuts in jobs and services in the years ahead. On capital, the proposed settlement for local government represents a cash freeze, which again is a real terms cut as it takes no account of inflation and the higher tender prices being experienced due to COVID and the EU transition. In our case, the situation is even worse as we have faced a £65,000 cash cut due to our falling population. All is not lost, however, Provost. COSLA has continued to lobby the government and opposition parties in the Scottish Parliament for a significantly improved settlement for local government in the final budget, which is due to be approved on the 10th of March. And this week I have written to the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Kate Forbes, to make the case for a better deal for Inverclyde. And given Ms Forbes has delayed her final budget until after the UK government budget is announced on the 3rd of March, in the hope of receiving further consequential funding, I have also written to the Chancellor of the Exchequer to ask for increased funding for councils across the United Kingdom. But turning to the most pressing matter before us today, which is obviously council tax, the Members' Budget Working Group is unanimously recommending that we freeze the Band D council tax at its current level of £1,331.84. And not that I would much choice, Provost. If we don't freeze council tax as it stands, we would forgo the council tax freeze grant of £1.2 million. And contrary to what some members might believe, I don't oppose a council tax freeze in principle. What I do oppose is a council tax freeze which is centrally imposed. Decisions in council tax should be taken by democratically elected local councillors, not MSPs sitting in Edinburgh. If the UK Chancellor was to tell the Scottish Government that any funding he provides is conditional on them freezing the Scottish rates of income tax, there would be rightly a public outcry. Why is there no outcry when the Scottish Government fundamentally undermines the role of local councillors to set their own tax levels? Any councillor who supports such centralisation simply does not believe in local government. We know the council tax is not a popular tax. For nearly 14 years, we've been waiting patiently on the Scottish Government and Parliament to bring forward a better alternative, to no avail. The council tax is a very visible tax. Unlike income tax and national insurance, which are deducted at source, we see council tax coming out of our bank accounts every week or every month. It is one of the largest household bills many of us face. Council tax is also an imperfect tax. It's not directly linked to the ability to pay. However, due to the banding structure and the council tax reduction scheme, those who have more tend to pay more. The same cannot be said of the council tax freeze. Those who benefit most from the council tax freeze are, just like the Scottish Government's recent decisions on income tax, those who have the most. Around a quarter of households in Inverclyde will receive no benefit from the council tax freeze. Those in the lowest banded properties will benefit to the tune of 43p a week, while those in the highest banded properties will benefit by £1.88 a week, based on an indicative 3% increase. If the Scottish Government really wants to help hard-pressed families, there are better ways of doing it than a council tax freeze. In fact, the Scottish Government isn't even offering the council tax freeze grant on a recurring basis. So that means that, all things being equal, council tax will need to increase by a greater amount next year to compensate for the loss of the freeze grant. The cynical, of course, might suggest that the freeze has something to do with the election in May and that the council tax freeze can be viewed as a pre-election bribe. Unfortunately, we've seen how council tax has been used as a political football every Scottish election since 2007 when the parties have tried to outbid each other. And this has directly, and in no small way, I have to say, contributed to the mess that local government finances are in. And unfortunately, it seems that Kate Forbes is repeating the mistakes of her predecessor. So, reluctantly, I intend to move the recommendations in the report, Provost, and specifically with regard to recommendation 3.4, ask the Council to support the recommendation of the Members' Budget Working Group that council tax should be frozen so that the council can access the council tax freeze grant. And I invite Councillor Clocker to second, Provost.
Thank you, Stephen. Jim, Councillor Clocker.
Yeah, thanks, Provost, and thanks, Stephen. Stephen's obviously went into detail on the settlement. I would only highlight two things. Stephen's already mentioned the non-baselining of the money, the £90 million that the Scottish local government's been given. And that is extremely important that we try and get that baseline. I think we all know that, because if it's not baseline, all we're actually doing is storing up problems for next year and the years after. So that is one of the things, and I know across the council and across councillors, we are actually keen to have that happening. The only other thing I would mention as well is the money put aside for pay settlements. Really, the money put aside for pay settlements, we know that our staff throughout this COVID pandemic have really stepped to the mark. And I would think that the amount of money in the budget for pay settlement really isn't enough. Our staff will quite rightly look to councils and councillors to say, you know, when are we going to get a decent pay rise to ensure that what we have done, especially over the last year, is mirrored in our pay packets. So I think those two are very important, and I'm sure all councillors will agree with that. So with that, I would happily second Stephen's recommendations. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Jim. We have two councillors who wish to speak. If you contribute to this debate, remember that you may only speak once. Natasha.
Thank you, Provost. Please let me know if my audio cuts out. That's why I have my video off today. I just wanted to kind of reiterate something that Councillor McCabe had said, just saying that it's so important that many of us lobby the Scottish and UK government just to make sure we do get as fair a settlement as possible. There's lots of good things that have came out of this budget, but there's still cuts that have to be made, and we should stop calling them things like savings. So I just wanted to implore my fellow councillors to write to both Kate Forbes and Rishi Sunak to ask that we do get a better settlement so that we can provide the services that our constituents need. Thank you. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you, listeners. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Provost. Not to get too Donald Rumsfeld about things, Provost, but I suspect the number of known unknowns and unknown unknowns that we've collectively faced in the past 12 months has been unprecedented in human history. I do commend all the daily decisions and actions that have been taken as we wade through the unknown to keep people safe and well and able to survive economically and emotionally and socially. And it's the economic things, I suppose, that we're really speaking about at this point in time. I support the proposal today to accept the funding from Scottish Government to allow a council tax freeze. The individual savings to households from this decision might not be huge, but we do know that families have been struggling. And we also know that research tells us very clearly that putting money into people's pockets is the clearest and most practical way to alleviate poverty. And the funding to freeze council tax this year simply will help to do this. We also understand that our most vulnerable households are already supported by exemptions or reductions in terms of council tax, but I would argue that vulnerability has enveloped a wider population this year. I was asked by a journalist this week if I thought that the decision to make this funding available was a pre-election bribe by the Scottish Government. And whilst I clearly don't speak for the Scottish Government, I would have to say though that when a global pandemic's wreaking havoc with our society at this time, and we're trying to mitigate its effects through any measures possible, the fact that this happens to be in a Holyrood election year is surely somewhat irrelevant. I suspect the virus has no idea that this is happening. We also know that the longevity of our funding content reaches far enough. We'd always like to have more financial certainty further into the future than we have. It's commendable that we take this approach. We always want to be able to make wise decisions and steward well the resources that we have. Again, the current context that we see ourselves in makes this more difficult to achieve than ever before. Some of the decisions that we've needed to make recently to ensure continuity and survival have been taken with more immediate timescales in mind than we would ever wish. Would it be preferable for the funding for the council tax freeze this year to be baselined into a budget basis to provide more sustainability? Of course it would. Have representations been made to Cabinet Secretary to suggest such an action? Of course they have. Councillor McCabe's already mentioned that, and I myself have also contacted her about this. And my understanding, Provost, is that this issue has not yet been concluded. Essentially, Kate Forbes has yet to say no. However, here and now, given where we are and all that we need to do, it's the right decision to accept the funding for this freeze. I'm thankful that we get to make the decision here today. The 22 of us get to weigh up the options and decide because we're closest to our communities. We know the people who've lost their jobs. We know the business owners who've been struggling coming in and out of lockdown. We know the people who've been furloughed or who are concerned about having to shield. We're also the 22 people who want to keep delivering the essential services to these and many more people that we represent. Making the decision to accept the funding for the council tax freeze today lets us do that in the coming year. Provost, I know that we'll continue to make the case in each year ahead of us that our services might and will continue to make things better for people in Inverclyde, that our stubborn statistics will move in the right direction due to what we achieve, and that we'll emphasise the fundamental importance of local government services both during this pandemic and very much so as we become what we need to become as a society moving forward. Here and now though, given where we are and all that we need to do, it is the right decision to accept the funding for this freeze. I would very much say today that yes, it is. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Channel.
Thanks, Provost. Just a comment. First, I'd like to say thanks to everybody because we turned around and worked together down here to try not to, we'll say, put all back out at once and how people feel. Yes, we've got to accept the money. And next year we're going to have to look, where do we get money from, or what do we cut, or what's it going to cost? And the very people we're protecting this year are going to have that all over again because they'll be in the same line as they are now, or only a year older. And where do we get the money from? So if we don't get an increase when they finally settle the British one, and then she settles through in Edinburgh with her yearly budget, then we're in really sticky bubbles because there's a limit to how much you can keep taking and stopping. Now, right now, we're getting people again moaning about our roads, even with some of them are Transfer Scotland, but we get to blame it. But our roads, we've got to, things like that, we've got to upgrade, but we've got to make life better for people, and people went through, and excuse the language, hell this year. Let's hope it finishes, but we've got to do something to stop this. And I'll say it, there's more and more of them coming from government telling us there's money, but there's what you can do. And yet we know locally we could spend it better to help them in another way. We can't do it. That I find sad because the exact same thing, they wouldn't like it in Edinburgh if it came from Westminster. And you can understand why. I think we've got to look at it and say, stop playing politics with folks' lives. Let's look at how we can make life better because this year has been true a pure hell for everybody. Excuse the language, probably. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Channel. I'm conscious that I haven't called on Councillor MacLeod. Jim, do you wish to say anything?
No, Provost, I'm fine, thank you.
It's fine. Now, I'm not quite sure. Stephen, do you want to sum up?
Yeah, just a couple of sort of brief responses to a couple of the points that Elizabeth made. I suppose in terms of families benefiting from the council tax freeze, as I said earlier on, a quarter of households won't get any benefit from the council tax freeze. And while, yes, some of those families will have received support in other means, for example, through the support for children, for free school meals, quite a significant number of those households probably wouldn't have received much in the way of support. And that £90 million nationally could have made a significant difference to the people who most need support, because let's be honest, many of us have not seen any reduction in our income during this pandemic. We've actually seen reductions in our costs, and many people are potentially building up some savings as a result of the pandemic, because they're not spending the same amount of money that they would have had. So the reality is that many of the people who will benefit from the council tax freeze really don't need the council tax freeze. That's the truth of the matter. But and I suppose this is the second point, that we don't have a choice. Elizabeth might think the 22 of us are sitting here with unfettered discretion, but when somebody tells you you forgo 1.2 million if you don't freeze the council tax, you effectively don't have a choice. And the reality will be that every council in Scotland, I confidently predict, will freeze the council tax this year, despite the fact that quite a number were planning increases in council tax, many of them higher than what we were planning. But they will realise that they would be criticised by their local public if they turned down a grant and chose to put up the council tax. Because in our case, we'd have to put it up by over 3.75% to actually justify doing it, and we're simply not going to do that. But in terms of those who aren't getting any benefit from council tax freeze, I have asked officers to look at how we could potentially support those families, and I would hope that we can have a report brought before us in due course looking at that as part of the overall budget strategy, because there is actually a lot of money coming to the council, and I'll give credit to the UK government and to the Scottish government. There's a lot of money coming. Unfortunately, the vast majority of that's non-recurring funding, but there's a lot of money coming for COVID recovery. The UK government is borrowing to the hilt, and I would hope that as we discuss over the coming weeks the actual budget that we're going to set on the 18th of March, I would hope we can look at how we make the best use of that funding to support the most vulnerable in our communities, but also to support the recovery that we need to make from this pandemic.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Now we could move to
Provost, if I may, we have a motion, and that motion is as set out in the recommendations in page 2 of the main papers, with the alteration in paragraph 3.4 that the council decides to freeze the council tax. Provost, that motion is unanimous and passed by the council. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Thanks. That item of business completed, we now proceed to the resolution. But I'm in your hands for this, Gerard. Could you direct me appropriately?
Thank you, Provost. It is item 4, and it is for Councillor McCabe as leader of the council to propose the formal resolution, and he will seek a seconder.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I move that there be no increase in the council tax for the financial year 2021-22, and accordingly that the Band D council tax be set at £1,331.84, and I would invite Councillor Clockerty to second.
Happy to second, Provost.
Thank you, Jim.
Resolution is unanimous, Provost. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gerard. There are now 3 notices of motions, and the first one is the Strathclyde Pension Fund notice of motion by Councillor Jim McElhaney, countersigned by Councillor John Crowther. The Strathclyde Pension Fund is once again under scrutiny from Inverclyde Council. Jim's motion, as far as I can see, focuses on its investment portfolio. Jim.
Thanks, Provost. On January 22nd, there took place a truly momentous event. After decades of campaigning, we finally banned the bomb, and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons entered into force. It is now illegal under international law to develop, test, produce, manufacture, acquire, possess, stockpile, transfer, use or threaten to use nuclear weapons. The first country to sign this treaty was the Vatican State. The Pope has said If we also take into account the risk of an accidental detonation as a result of error of any kind, the threat of their use, as well as their very possession, is to be firmly condemned. He, along with other faith leaders, is unequivocal in his rejection of all strategies involving the use of nuclear weapons. The Pope said, "Weapons of mass destruction, particularly nuclear weapons, create nothing but a false sense of security. They cannot constitute the basis for peaceful coexistence between members of the human family." The Vatican has called on all other states to ratify the treaty as soon as possible, commending it as an important step towards a nuclear weapons-free world. By adhering to the treaty, states formally reject the fallacy that might makes right and its pernicious modern corollary that some nations have the right to nuclear weapons while others do not. And they affirm that international peace and security consists in what supports the common good of all humanity. It is therefore now untenable for anyone to maintain a position whilst agreeing that weapons of mass destruction are abhorrent, that they call themselves multilateralists and only support multilateral disarmament. With regards to the current conflict in Yemen, the UN had verified the deaths of at least 7,700 civilians by March 2020, with most caused by Saudi-led coalition airstrikes, bombs built by some of the companies the Strathclyde Pension Fund invest in. Monitoring groups believe the death toll is far higher. The US-based Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project said in October 2019 that it had recorded more than 100,000 fatalities, including 12,000 civilians killed in direct attacks. More than 23,000 fatalities were reported in 2019, making it the second most lethal year of the war so far. Thousands more civilians have died from preventable causes, including malnutrition, disease and poor health. The charity Save the Children estimated that 85,000 children with severe acute malnutrition might have died between April 2015 and October 2018. About 80,000 of the population, 24 million people, need humanitarian assistance and protection. Some 20 million people need help securing food, according to the UN. Almost 10 million of them are considered one step away from famine. With regard to the substantive motion, I'm grateful to Councillor Jackson for circulating in advance a proposed amendment. Colin has taken the time to come up with a meaningful wording that would enhance my motion. I would therefore be more than happy to accept the proposed amendment and encapsulate all of the wording in the substantive motion. I look to Mr Malone's guidance in achieving that. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you, Jim. Your seconder is Councillor Crowther. John. John, you're on mute.
Yes, that's fine. I've had a read through the paper that was actually submitted by Councillor Jackson, which very well enhances what was proposed by Councillor McElhaney. Now, Councillor McElhaney has went into this in great depth, as everyone has heard, and he has stroked all the T's, dotted all the I's, and there's very little I can actually add to this other than to commend the paper that has been put before us as amended by Councillor Jackson.
Thanks very much, John. Just a bit for clarification, so that we all know what we're talking about. Jim, Colin's motion is subsumed in your motion now, isn't it? Is that correct? Jim, can you hear me?
That would be correct. After my basically.
After you submitted your motion.
After my motion, then we could add on Colin's 3 points.
Right. Okay.
Provost, may I interrupt, please, Provost? Just to clarify that point, and thank you to Councillor McElhaney for advising of the acceptance of the Councillor Jackson change to that. Could I just please clarify with Councillors McElhaney and Crowther, please, that I had understood that it was the deletion of the second paragraph of Councillor McElhaney's motion that was being accepted. I take it that the first paragraph remains, the second paragraph is deleted, and what I have posted on the chat function to everyone is the substitution for paragraph 2. If I could just clarify that, please, with Councillor McElhenney, please, Provost.
Thank you.
No, Gerard, it was in addition to my 2 paragraphs to add on Councillor Jackson's 3 points.
Provost, I thank you, and I thank Councillor McElhenney for that clarification. I fully understand it is an addition to what Councillors McElhenney and Crowther have already proposed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Gerard. So we're all clear what the motion is, and John has seconded the motion. Now, David, I understand you want to make an amendment. Is that correct?
Correct.
Could you do that then?
I would like to compliment Councillors McElhenney and Jackson on 2 really quite eloquent and powerful motions. They really are. Both of them, I find, as a practicing and committed Christian, I find a great deal of problem with this whole thing. I do sympathise a lot with what they say, but at the end of the day, I think that my prime responsibility as a councillor is the defence of the population. And the defence of that population is best served by us having a nuclear deterrent. Now, at SPT, I've worked very closely over the last couple of years with Councillor Richard Bell, who's the chairman of the, is also the Glasgow City Treasurer. And I'm quite content that the fund itself is in very good hands. So the amendment that I would like to put forward is the UK is a signatory to the 1970 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It is a member of NATO and not a signatory to the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW. Under those circumstances, we should support the committee and trustees of the Strathclyde Pension Fund to invest where they consider best for the financial health of the fund. Thank you, Provost.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, David. Understand, Councillor McCabe. Stephen, have you a comment?
Yeah, it was just to provide some clarity around the proposed amendment that Councillor Jackson had circulated, and the intention potentially was that Councillor Clockerty was going to move and Councillor Murphy second. The substantive part of the motion that's before us today is the second paragraph of the paper. Everything else is essentially background and preamble. So the actual amendment was to the second paragraph. So it's essentially substituting what's in the amendment to that paragraph from calls on Strathclyde Pension Fund 2. So that was the intention. It wasn't as an addition to that second paragraph. So I don't know where that leaves us in terms of reaching an agreement, but that was what the intention was.
Thanks, David. Thank you. Gerard, did you want to come in?
Yes, please, Provost. Firstly, at an appropriate stage, Councillor Wilson has made an amendment. I've attempted to place that on the chat function. I believe seconder is coming in, and if I can just simply cut to the chase, if I may put it that way, that Councillor Brooks is seconding that.
That's correct, Provost. I second it, and I've also put the words in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Provost. Therefore, we have a competent amendment in the names of Councillors Wilson and Brooks. Provost, in relation to the matter that Councillor McCabe has raised, it is clear that Councillors McElhenney and Crowther are proposing a motion that has effectively 3 paragraphs, those 2 which are on page 10 of the main papers, plus the additional words that have been circulated. However, Councillor McCabe is indicating that paragraph 2 on page 10 would be expected to be deleted, and that would be substituted by the wording that has been circulated originally by Councillor Jackson, possibly now by Councillors Clockerty and McCabe. Provost, it's a situation here of whether it is accepted that there is a clear indication of paragraphs 1, 2 and 3, plus an amendment, and plus a further amendment that involves paragraphs 1 and 3 only, i.e. paragraph 2 being deleted and Councillor Jackson, in his absence, wording substituted. That's roughly where we are just now, Provost. We would need a seconder for the further amendment if that were to be proposed.
Is it, Gerard, is that the amendment to, is that a seconder for David?
No, thank you, Provost. We have the motion from Councillors McElhenney and Crowther in the form that I understand, and if that is not being amended. We have secondly an amendment from Councillors Wilson and Brooks, which is, as I've circulated, relative to the UK being a signatory, etc., per the chat function, and possibly, Provost, there is a further amendment, and again I say possibly, with either Councillors McCabe, Clockerty or Murphy, relative to the wording that has been circulated by Councillor Jackson. I take your guidance, Provost, and that of the Leader of the Councils. Thank you.
Right. Stephen, Jim, Natasha, do any of you want to propose a further amendment?
I'm going to leave the decision up to Councillor Clockerty on this one, Provost.
Thank you, Stephen. Good judgment there. Jim.
Yeah, thanks. Can I say in this, when we discussed this at the Labour Group, the problem we had with Jim's motion was when you were actually talking about involved in arms manufacturing, because what arms manufacturing is extremely wide. It's an extremely wide subject, and if you're actually saying to a pension scheme, don't have anything to do with arms manufacturing, most of us are not pacifists. If you're a pacifist, then you don't believe in armies and you don't believe in that. As far as I know, there is no pacifist on the council. Could be wrong. So that's where that problem is. We've also got the wee issue about fiduciary duty, because what you're virtually saying is you're giving all that preamble, but what you're actually saying is, well, the trustees have got to act in the best interest of their members anyway, so anyway actually saying the motion doesn't really count. So that is one of the issues as well with putting in fiduciary duty, because it's actually saying the trustees have got to do their job and making sure that anything they do are in the best interest of the members. And probably Councillor Wilson actually said that when he was talking about his amendment. So for us, that is what the issue is. I would hope that Colin's amendment, and when he was discussing it with Jim, I was hoping that what Colin had put down as an amendment actually adds to what Jim was looking for. It doesn't take away anything, it actually adds to it. Everything else is stuff, you don't want to be seen to be, it's a motive about Yemen, it's a motive about Saudi Arabia, there's an awful lot of things a motive. But none of us want to see Strathclyde Regional Council having a blanket ban in anything that's to do with the arms industry, because that is so wide-ranging. It's incredible. Where does it stop? So it's anything to do with shipbuilding, anything to do with the Navy, anything to do with the Air Force, anything to do with anything. It's meaning that this council is calling upon Strathclyde region not to have anything to do with it. So I would hope that Jim accepts Colin's amendment that just takes that away, especially when we talk about fiduciary, because the whole fiduciary thing just means it's up to the trustees anyway.
Jim, can I ask you?
That was Colin's sense, I believe. So I would ask Jim to include that.
Okay. So, Jim, can you say quite concisely what you want to do? Is it which paragraph or all paragraphs have to be included in Jim's, or you wish to be included in Jim's motion?
I think there are probably too many Jims, but I think what we're essentially doing is deleting the second paragraph, which calls about financial exposure to companies that are involved in arms manufacturing, just total ban on that. And what we are actually saying is substituting that by the paragraphs that Colin has spoken to Jim McElhaney about, and that is adopt the statement of investments, to look at the risk and to set targets for positive responsible investment. So I think Colin's amendment covers everything that Jim's wanting to do, only it sets it out in an awful lot more detail, an awful lot more concise, and I would hope Jim would accept that.
Right, thank you, Jim. I think that's clearer now. Jim, how do you feel about it was originally your amendment and it was originally your motion, and amendments have been made. How do you feel about that?
Provost, with all due respect, looking at Councillor Jackson's email that he sent out to everyone, it starts with, though I'm supportive of the motion, I would like to propose an amendment which includes the following. It does not say replace any of my motion. It says which includes the following. Hence the reason why I said to keep minds and add on the 3 points that Colin raised. I was quite content to do that. So I'm quite content to stand by that position.
Okay.
Point of order, Councillor Christopher McElhaney.
Christopher.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. To be frank and blunt, Provost, you can't propose an amendment via email. We're talking about a Councillor Colin Jackson amendment. Councillor Jackson's not at this meeting. He's not moved the amendment. The Labour Party seem to be talking about an amendment, but no one's actually moved an amendment. So at the moment, we've got a motion from Councillor James McElhaney and we've got an amendment from Councillor David Wilson. That should go to a vote unless the Labour Party want to proceed with actually raising an amendment.
Gerard, I wondered if you could...
Provost, this is, thank you for that opportunity, Provost. This is an entirely legitimate and proper debate on the framing of a council resolution, Provost. In terms of the point of order, I would advise you, Provost, that there is no point of order to determine. The reason being for this is that in fairness and in accuracy, both Councillors McElhaney and Crowther, in terms of proposing their motion legitimately and properly as they have done, made clear reference to a set of papers that had been circulated and thus have been termed or called Councillor Jackson's point. So this discussion about what is included in the motion or not included in the motion is entirely proper and it is right to be precise. The matter which is outstanding is that Councillor Clougherty has, again properly, moved a further amendment that includes paragraph 1 of the motion, clearly deletes now, which is a difference, paragraph 2 of the motion, but inserts the 3 points from what has been termed Councillor Jackson's previous email. There is no difficulty in referring to Councillor Jackson's drafting. He is not present. He is not making a motion. It is a term that both the councillors and indeed we have used in the debate. The only matter that is outstanding, Provost, is that if Councillor Clougherty has made a further amendment as accurately as I believe he has, he requires a seconder. And I think that seconder might be coming from the chat function. I'm trying to keep track of that as well. But I think there is a seconder for that as well, Provost. I hope that assists, Provost.
Provost, can I come back in, please?
I'm waiting. I'll bring you in a moment, Jim. I'm waiting for the seconder, Jim's seconder, so that we can move on.
I'm happy to second for Councillor Clougherty.
Right. Okay.
I did put that in the chat function. It must have gotten lost in that, so that I wasn't interrupting colleagues.
And do you intend to say anything further, Natasha?
Just on it, the reason why this has been drafted in the way that it is because, albeit some of the points earlier on made were quite clear and concise, we believe that the ethical responsibilities of any fund should be to reduce the harm that's caused to the people on the planet that inhabit not just this country but countries around the world. And that is one of the reasons why I'm seconding this, is that I think that as far as possible we should be reducing the harm to people and places around the world. We're all citizens of the world and of this country, and as such we have an ethical responsibility, not just for ourselves but also for our constituents and those out with our boundaries and wards. So thank you, Provost, for letting me say that little bit.
No, not at all, no. Gerard, do we now proceed to a vote?
Provost.
Provost.
Sorry, Jim.
Provost, before we do that, I believe two things. Councillor McElhenney, James, wishes to come back in, and I think Councillor MacLeod is wishing to participate in the debate. Thank you, Provost.
Yeah, Jim was first. Well, as Councillor Cotter alluded to, we've got an embarrassment of Jim's here, but Jim McElhenney. Jim
McLeod. Thanks, Provost.
Jim McElhenney first, then Jim McLeod.
Thanks, Provost. Just to re-emphasise that Councillor Clockerty's proposed amendment is not in accordance with Councillor Jackson's proposed wording. That was all.
Okay, Jim McLeod.
Yes, thank you, Provost. If we all cast our minds back a couple of years now, I can't remember the organisation that was in touch with myself, and I put a motion at that time forward to Council which had unanimous support, and the organisation that was about the use of bombs that were getting used, particularly on innocent individuals. And I just wish I could remember the name of the organisation just now. But if you cast your mind back, and Provost, I think you might have been in the photograph. There was a photograph with cross-party members in the Grand Corridor. I'm sure I can dig that picture out. Of several of us posing with a poster about banning these bombs being used. So I would just remind people about that. I think there's, we talk about responsible investment here, and I've got worries about continue to support firms that are making, or companies who are making bombs, which is we can see what's happening. It has already been mentioned about Yemen, but not just Yemen, but other places. To continue to support companies who are then selling bombs, which is agreeable by the UK government under licence to a country who is then dropping bombs, as I say, or missiles on innocent individuals in Yemen, I think is a scandal. And I think just for that reason only, we should really not just consider it as an investment issue, but as a moral issue. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. Now, as far as I can see now, I'm relying on your guidance, Gerard, but as far as I can see, we have a motion and 2 amendments. Is that correct?
Provost, yes it is. And Provost, just to draw to your attention, Councillor Quinn would wish to contribute to the debate, but there is a motion, an amendment and further amendment, which I will clarify at your discretion, Provost, at a later appropriate juncture.
Thank you. Okay. Gerard.
So, question from Councillor Quinn, please, Provost.
Sorry, Lynn. Right, please go ahead.
It's okay. You'll be glad to know that I've not got a motion to put forward or another amendment. But I've just got a wee bit of clarification. I don't know, first of all, we maybe all need to declare an interest, because if we're actually members of this pension fund, maybe we should, the members that are in the pension scheme, maybe we should declare an interest. I'm not sure, but we'll leave it there. It's just the question about, can we actually enforce this really in practice? So I think we all agree with the sentiments of it, but can we enforce it in practice? Because in effect, it would be for the members of the pension fund to make a decision on what their fund is invested in, and not for us as a group of independent councillors that are potentially members of the fund to force that upon them. So obviously there'll be rules of the scheme and everything. So I'm just asking about
the legitimacy of this, and that actually is it doable, and legally can we actually apply this?
Thank you. Thanks, Lynn. Gerard.
Provost, I can assure Councillor Quinn and the other members who may be affected on two grounds. The membership, if any, of Strathclyde Pension Fund is not a disqualifying factor in Councillor's decision on this item. If it were, Councillor Quinn is entirely correct, a declaration of interest would be required. But that interest, in terms of being an ordinary pension fund potential, is so dilute and so remote as would not be accorded any status in terms of a declaration of interest. And secondly, there is a recognition within the Councillors' Code that elected members ordinarily may be members of pension schemes, and their interests are so dilute, so they are entitled to participate in the discussion themselves. I'm aware that's the minor aspect of Councillor Quinn's question. It again is a competent request. What Strathclyde Pension Fund wish to do with this matter is, of course, a matter for the trustees or members of the pension fund, the executive officers. If any councillor were an executive officer of the pension fund, I would have to emphasise that is a declaration of interest, but I'm aware that that is not the case within Inverclyde. But nonetheless, it is a legitimate expression of the democratic aspect of the council's participation in the pension fund, to put it to the pension fund members or trustees. What the pension fund members and trustees do with that, of course, is a matter for them and a matter for their separate members. It is an entirely legitimate motion. Thank you, Provost.
Thanks very much, Gerard. Councillor Clougherty is one of our many Jims here.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I just want clarity. I think for myself and Councillor McElhenney, I think Jim, you're agreeing with Councillor Jackson's wording. You're only saying about you want it put on to the end of yours rather than deleting that paragraph of yours. So Councillor Jackson's wording is still included in yours. Am I correct in that? Yeah.
Yeah, Councillor Jackson's wording was in addition to mine, is what is read.
I've got to admit, putting members through the vote on that, it seems a bit silly, especially when I don't know what Councillor Jackson actually said to you, Jim. So in that case, if Natasha allows me to do it, I would just withdraw my amendment from it. That makes sense. We're playing semantics here with wording, so rather than actually doing that, then what you've actually got is a straightforward amendment for Councillor Wilson and the motion. So I'm quite happy to do that if Natasha allows that as well.
Thank you, Jim. So we're minus one amendment, but we still have the motion and David's amendment.
Provost, I would need, please, forgive me, Provost, we would need Councillor Murphy's confirmation of the position just now. Thank you.
I would say I think part of the idea behind the motion that the group drafted and put forward as an amendment to Councillor McElhenney and Crowther's motion was in the sentiment that rather than making it a single issue, it was to make it all-encompassing, because obviously we have well, not obviously, but I feel we have a moral and ethical duty beyond simply the arms. And I know that, for example, some people here have had pasts which we've maybe dealt with pension funds, or we've maybe worked in areas where maybe some of these issues coincide with. So reluctantly, I will withdraw it for the ease of business, because I believe that having the amendment as worded and as agreed by Councillors McElhenney and Crowther, I think we still get what we're looking for. We're looking for that all-encompassing motion, but I do feel it is rather unnecessary to single out one amongst all the others that are there, but I will withdraw it reluctantly.
Thank you, Natasha. Very gracious of you.
Thank you, Provost.
Gerard, I'll come back to you. It appears now that we have a motion and an amendment, just solely one. We are down to one amendment. Will we proceed to a vote?
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Provost. I'll proceed to a vote. We have a motion from Councillor Jim McElhenney and Councillor Crowther in the terms that are set out in page 10, with the addition of the wording that I circulated in the chat box that originally came from Councillor Jackson. So it's the additional 3 points. We have an amendment in the name of Councillors Wilson and Brooks, again as circulated in the chat function. I will proceed to the roll call vote and I'll ask for motion or amendment. Councillor Alfeld, Councillor McElhinney's motion or Councillor Wilson's amendment?
Motion.
Councillor Brooks.
Amendment.
Councillor Clockerty.
Motion.
Councillor Crowther.
Motion.
Councillor Curley.
Motion.
Councillor Dorian.
Motion.
Councillor MacLeod.
Motion.
Councillor McCabe.
Motion.
Councillor McCormick.
Motion.
Councillor Chris McElhinney.
And while I'm using this opportunity, Gerard, can I just say it looks like my connection's about to time out and it might take about 3 minutes for me to load back in, just to let you know about the following item. But motion for this vote.
Thank you, Councillor McElhinney. Motion. Councillor Jim McElhinney.
Jim.
Motion.
Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Mackenzie.
Motion.
Thank you. Might be.
Motion.
Councillor Moran.
Motion.
Murphy.
Motion, please.
Councillor Nelson, I do not believe is present. That's correct, isn't it? No, Councillor Nelson?
I'm here. Motion.
Oh,
Councillor Nelson.
I beg your pardon, Councillor Nelson. I hadn't recorded you at the original part of the meeting. Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Motion. Councillor Quinn.
Motion.
Councillor Rebecca.
Motion.
Councillor Robertson.
Motion.
And Councillor Wilson.
Amendment.
Provost.
Motion.
Provost, I have 19 votes for the motion and 2 votes for the amendment. I'm just going to look to Miss Lang to get confirmation. 92. I declare the motion carried 19-2. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much. For a moment there, I thought it was all going to go nuclear, pardon the expression. Do you know, in 1932, there was an international conference of pacifists in Paris, and the police had to be called after an hour to stop the fighting. But in any case, we'll move on. The next notice of motion was the campaign to keep the £20 a week universal credit increase as a notice of a motion by Councillor Christopher McElhinney, councillor signed by Councillor Jim MacLeod. Appendix 1 to the motion explains that the £20 boost announced on March 2020 is time limited and due to end this April. Christopher.
Provost, Councillor McElhinney, I believe, has been timed out.
Has he?
Are we okay to wait for him to come back in for his motion?
Yes.
Provost, thank you for doing that. Provost, I will just alert you to the fact that Councillor McElhinney also wrote to me to confirm, and he asked me to advise the council that when this motion was originally drafted, there was a reference to the £20 top-up ending next year. Now that's just with it being drafted last year. It does now in fact mean this year that the £20 top-up for this year. So perhaps I can use some of those useful moments, sorry, those moments usefully, just to fill in for Councillor McElhinney till he's able to rejoin us. It would be entirely competent, Provost, if you wished, to look to the seconder of this motion, if you wished, if he would be prepared to actually make any comments at this stage.
That's entirely sensible. Jim, in the absence of Chris, now I'm talking to Councillor MacLeod, you know, with the difficulties with our various gyms, but Councillor MacLeod, Jim, could you speak to the motion?
Yes, Provost, I'm happy to speak to the motion. However, what I would say that what the comments I have got are more, I would say, phrased as a second. So I certainly hope in speaking to I do it justice.
You will.
The additional £20 universal credit uplift by the UK was welcome, and it's certainly helped many individuals and families in Inverclyde, Scotland and the UK since it was introduced. In an area like Inverclyde, there are high numbers of individuals and families on state benefits, either because of unemployment or being part-time workers or low-paid employment. The additional £20 has proven to be vital, and for many claimants, it has been vital in helping to assist with the likes of food and heating their homes. 11 years of Tory austerity has made life all the harder for many families, particularly in areas like Inverclyde, where there are high levels of deprivation and health inequalities. The COVID pandemic has more than highlighted this. The photograph, I think, that many people would have seen of people queuing in Glasgow recently, queuing for food, was an absolute scandal, and certainly should not be happening in a state like the UK. It's an absolute scandal. The access and the right to having food, heat, and a roof over your head, these things should all be a human right. Everybody should have access to these things. It is ridiculous. As I'm sure Chris will say if he gets the opportunity to come in, I'm sure that she would say we have to retain us £20 uplift. And remember, at the end of the day, £20, it's not a huge sum of money. It equates to just over £1,000 a year. However, for many people, it's kept their heads above water. I hope that all council members will support this motion, and if agreed, the Inverclyde Council will work with COSLA, the Scottish Government, and others to urge the Chancellor to retain the £20 a week universal credit payment in the forthcoming budget. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. Thank you.
Provost.
Yeah.
Forgive me, Provost. I was just going to make a suggestion, perhaps, Provost. Councillor MacLeod, having very helpfully outlined his seconding of the intended motion, I would be suggesting to you, Provost, that in order to make any sense of the debate, and in fairness to Councillor Chris McElhenney, that really it would be very much appropriate for Councillor McElhenney to move. I think Councillor MacLeod will accept that he's seconding this. For Councillor McElhenney to move, I would wonder, Provost, would you have a short pause, please?
Thanks, Gerard. Gerard, I'm back online now.
Thank you, Provost. I will stop now. Thank you.
Yes,
thanks, Chris.
To thank Councillor
Never have you been more welcome, Chris.
Yes, thank you, Provost. Well taught, as they say. Thanks to Councillor MacLeod for outlining that and seconding the motion in a bit of an inverted order. I think the key point here is that if the £20 top up is taken away, you're talking in the region of about £6 million is taken away annually from the most vulnerable people in Inverclyde. And you just need to look at all the hardship that's been caused during the coronavirus. That's £6 million less that people will have to spend on utility bills. That the bills are going through the roof because they're in home more than ever before. It's £6 million that will be taken away from local butchers, local shops. It's £6 million that people won't have to spend in their Inverclyde economy. And I suppose it's 6 million reasons that highlight the clear imbalance that the coronavirus has had a much harder impact on people at the bottom in terms of economic output in society, and those that are much better off. And this £20 reduction will coincide with thousands of people having furlough coming to an end. And when furlough comes to an end, not only will that clearly put them into financial hardship, we'll most likely see unemployment in areas like Inverclyde go through the roof. So it'll be the perfect storm. And I think it's just really crass of any members of the Conservative Unionist Party today vote against this top-up purely for politics, and we've got the opportunity to unite here to demand that the Chancellor keeps money in the pockets of the people that we were elected to serve. So thank you to Councillor MacLeod for seconding that, and I duly move the motion.
Thanks very much, Christopher. It was worth the waiting. I'm going to call Graham now because I think he has an amendment. Is that correct, Graham?
Yes, Provost, and thank you very much for bringing me in. Yeah, I don't think I disagree with much of what what Chris and Jim has said. Quite clearly, the £20 uplift has been a lifesaver for those who have received it. But if you remember our earlier debate about the council tax and about how the UK government should not be forcing Scottish government should not be forcing councils on what to do or what not to do. The wording of Councillor McElhenny's motion talks about demanding that the UK government does this. Provost, I don't think that's your phraseology as the first citizen of Inverclyde, that you want to demand the elected, the UK government to do something. And neither would I suggest you'd want to demand the Scottish Parliament or the First Minister of Scotland to do something. You may wish to highlight, you may wish to strongly bring to their attention, but the wording of the motion before us, I would suggest, is not of Inverclyde. And I've proposed an amendment which does continue to say that we urge that they continue the £20 increase for the foreseeable future, and that we accept that the Commons Working Pension Committee have already advised they want to keep it to April 2022. So the debate is already happening in the House. The debate is already happening where the decision sits. And that's what Councillor McCabe said. It's where the decision sits when he talked about council tax. The council tax decision sits with us. This sits with the UK Parliament. And of course, we want to ensure that our citizens do receive that extra £20, continue to receive it. So my point 1 and 2 simply acknowledges, if I was writing to somebody, I'd want to acknowledge what they have done. And that's what point 1 and point 2 does. It acknowledges the uplift, it acknowledges the £1,040 better off that people have been since the Chancellor introduced this from the 6th of April 2020. It also goes on to say that it's been a huge support to many Scots. And then point 3 and 4 says similar to what Councillor McElhenny, Councillor MacLeod's motion says. It then asks the UK government to keep it, and we hope when the budget comes along that the right decision will be made by the UK government. And Provost, this is my amendment.
Thanks very much, Graham. So you're looking for more or less the same thing, but you want more temperate language. And who's your seconder, Graham? Is it David?
Happy to second, Provost.
Thank you. We have a couple of members, at least 2 members, wish to comment before we proceed to anything like a vote. Natasha, Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Provost. Yes, mine was more so just a comment on Councillor Brooks' amendment. I feel like he's kind of touched on it a little bit. It's not as much an amendment rather than just stipulating what has been done to date. I commend him for actually including within it that there should be made a longer term solution, but I do feel as though the amendment is a bit unnecessary. But that is not a personal attack, that's just a personal feeling with the amendment.
Thanks very much, Natasha. Chris Curley.
Yeah, again, I was, I think I welcome what they call it, making the amendment. I think it's touched a lot of the stuff that the original motion actually makes, but it does water it down a little bit. I think the original motion talks about a permanent increase in the universal credit, and Graham's amendment talks about what they call it, an increase for a period of time. It goes back to the debate we had with council tax earlier on. What we were talking about here in the motion before us, as it stands at the moment, is baselining that 20% increase in council tax to make it permanent, which the amendment proposed does not do.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I mean, if you had read the amendment to give them their full title that Chris likes to give them, the Conservative and Unionist Group, before seeing the motion, you probably wouldn't have anything to disagree with in terms of the amendment. And I suppose, despite what Graham would view as intemperate language in the original motion from Unite the Community section, I think, as Chris Cully says, it does go further in terms of looking at making the additional £20 permanent and extending the legacy benefits. And let's be honest, an extra £20 a week for some of the poorest families in the country is a help, but it's not in any way a living income that people have. So I'd like to see us go beyond £20, but certainly in the short term, I think that £20 is very much needed, and I think it should be a permanent uplift that we should be seeking to build upon. So I would certainly, if we're going to a vote, I would certainly be supporting the original motion over the amendment.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I think Tommy wants to come in. Councillor McVeigh.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I think I absolutely support Councillor McElhaney's motion. 100% the £20 is very important. But we know the Scottish Government has additional powers when it comes to welfare. So I wonder if you would consider adding in a further phrase that if this £20 increase is stopped, then the Scottish Government will use their additional powers to replace it.
So, Tommy, is that an amendment?
Yes, Provost, that could be an amendment, or Councillor McElhaney can add it on to the motion he's already put forward.
Now, if it's an amendment, do you have a seconder?
I think Councillor Rebecca is going to second me, Provost.
I'll second that.
Right. Thank you. Thanks, Channel. Thanks, Tommy. So we have a motion and two amendments.
Provost, it would be helpful at this stage if, as invited, whether Councillors McElhaney and MacLeod would accept the wording that Councillor McVeigh has said, which is that if stopped, the Scottish Government would use their powers to replace it. And if Councillors McElhaney and MacLeod accept it, that's a position. If they don't accept it, then Councillor McVeigh and Councillor Rebecca have a further amendment, exactly as you've said. Thank you.
Obviously, just for clarity, no, I won't unfortunately accept the amendment. The motion's very concise. It's demanding the UK government does something that it has the fiscal powers to do. To then say that if the UK government doesn't extend the £20 universal credit top-up, the Scottish government should do so. That's asking for something that we don't actually know how much it would cost. Off the top of my head, it would probably cost £425 million. And I would obviously point out to members that the Scottish Government doesn't have the bond issuing powers, and I'd be more than happy if they wanted to make an amendment saying that we call on the UK Government to give the Scottish Government the fiscal levers so that it can actually take control of benefits such as universal credit. But I think that just highlights the debate. We'd absolutely welcome if somebody wanted to bring a motion forward in the future on that topic, but I think we should just keep to the issue at hand here, which is that in a matter of weeks, 7,500 people in Inverclyde will have £20 a week taken out of their pocket, and we as a council have the opportunity to demand. And I know some people might think we shouldn't use language such as demand, but I think when we're the most deprived community in Scotland, we're entitled to demand on behalf of our constituents that this UK government doesn't take money out of their pockets. So although I understand the logic behind Councillor McVeigh's amendment, I'd ask him if he'd maybe just take that off the table, speak to me offline, and perhaps I'd be happy to work with him in bringing something back to a future council meeting. But I'd urge members just to stick to the motion at hand and support it, please.
Tommy, you don't have to, but do you wish to respond?
I've nothing further to add at this time, Provost.
Thanks very much. Stephen?
Yeah, Prof, I'm only coming back in again because I didn't have the opportunity to comment on the further amendment because it hadn't been made at the time I was invited in to speak. And I have to say I tend to agree with Councillor McElhenney on this particular matter. Responsibility for universal credit rests with the UK government, and the focus should be on the UK government rather than a what-if scenario in terms of the Scottish government. So I would tend to support the original motion rather than either of the amendments.
Thanks. Chair, we have two amendments and one motion. Will you guide us through the voting process?
Of course, Provost. And I'll just first off clarify what's before
Provost,
the
Provost, sorry.
Provost.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Provost, obviously, bear in mind Councillor McCabe's comments then that I don't think I'll win this vote, so I'll withdraw.
Right, thanks, Tommy. I'm not thanking you for withdrawing, but I'm thanking you for your timely intervention. Thank you.
Councillor,
we now have one amendment.
Councillor Rebecca, sorry, Provost. Councillor Rebecca, please.
Yes, of course. Channel.
Sorry, Jerry, I thought you seen my hands up agreeing with Tommy, so we'll take it back out. All right.
Right.
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor Rebecca.
So we are now down to an amendment, that's Graham's amendment, and the motion, Christopher's motion.
Provost, as you say, we have the motion from Councillors McElhenney and MacLeod, specified within the agenda papers, page 14. We have the amendment from Councillors Brooks and Wilson, as helpfully circulated on the chat function. I will not read it, Provost, and members will be able to refer to that. A roll call vote, Provost, but in fact, I do actually have to say, Provost, I must correct myself, there being a conflict here, a contest here, Councillor McElhenney does have the opportunity to sum up the debate. So it is Councillor McElhenney's opportunity to sum up. Thank you, Provost.
That's right.
Yeah, thanks for that opportunity, Provost.
Christopher, my
I think all
apologies.
points. No, that's absolutely fine. I think all points have been well made, so I'm happy to proceed to the vote.
Thank you, Provost. I will proceed to the vote with your permission.
Yes, please.
Again, roll call vote. Motion, Councillor McElhenney MacLeod. Amendment, Councillors Brooks and Wilson. I'll start with the roll call. Councillor Alfeld, motion or amendment?
Motion.
Councillor Brooks.
Amendment.
Councillor Clockerty.
Motion.
Councillor Crowther.
Motion.
Councillor Curley.
Motion.
Councillor Dorian.
Motion.
Councillor MacLeod.
Motion.
Councillor McCabe.
Motion.
Councillor McCormick.
Motion.
Councillor Chris McElhenney. Councillor Chris McElhenney.
Motion.
Thank you. Councillor Jim McElhenney.
Motion.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Motion.
Councillor McVeigh.
Motion.
Councillor Moran.
Motion.
Councillor Murphy.
Motion, please.
Councillor Nelson.
Motion.
Councillor Quinn.
Motion.
Councillor Rebecca.
Motion.
Councillor Robertson.
Motion.
And Councillor Wilson.
Amendment.
Provost, there being 19 votes for the motion and 2 votes for the amendment. I'll just make sure that's confirmed from Ms. Lang.
Can I just clarify, did you ask the provosts?
I beg your pardon, Provost, I did not ask yourself, Provost. Thank you, Sharon.
I have to show
Provost.
my hand now. Motion.
Thank you, Provost. My apologies. Provost, the procedure correctly having been finished at this point, I declare that there are in fact 19 votes for the motion and 2 votes for the amendment. The motion is carried. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Gerard. Item number 7 is the Lee Jeans Factory sit-in 40th anniversary. It was 40 years ago, sit-ins were relatively new to the UK, but they've been common in Europe and the United States in the first half of last century. I just thought you'd all like to know that. Christopher.
Obviously, I had notified you today that I was quite content to move this motion formally, because I thought you had yourself written quite a good column in the Telegraph on the issue, and I think that the motion speaks for itself, and I would be happy to pass over to Councillor Quinn and speak to the motion as she seconds it.
That's very appropriate, Christopher. Thank you. Lynn, do you want to speak? Lynn?
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Yeah, just to echo what Chris has said, obviously the article last night was very much welcome. It's just obviously, as an unashamed feminist, I thought I'd just take this opportunity just to highlight some of the points of the sit-in just from a female's perspective. Obviously, in 1981, I don't know if you're all aware, but women at that time in the factory get paid 2/3 of their male counterpart's salary. So obviously they were working under that gender pay gap, which we still see just now, but obviously it's not as significant as it was then. All the managers, the union officials and the politicians that were involved at that time were all male as well. So I think it just highlights, you know, how significant it was in terms of these females, you know, when normally they were pretty compliant, but to stage such an event, especially as they were dealing with their own care responsibilities. Despite their care responsibilities at home, they managed to sustain this for 7 months. But just on the last point, I think we're actually looking at some of the testimonies of some of the women there. They reported that a number of politicians and union officials made statements to the press and follow-ups outside the factory, but actually when they actually came to it, the support that they really recognised and valued was their fellow rank and file union members. It was actually our own shipyard workers who came out in solidarity with the female workers, giving up 50p a week, which doesn't sound a lot now, but then was pretty significant. They gave up 50p a week for their own salary to support the women, and 200 of them attended when the actual planned closure date. So I think there's kind of lessons there that can be learned from today about everybody standing together, and it's not necessarily about the position, it's about the numbers and us all coming together to fight for the greater good. So on that note, I'm happy to second the motion.
Well, thanks very much. I'm going to call in Councillor MacLeod. Jim, just in case, I'm conscious that I may have failed to call on one of the other items. Jim, do you wish to say anything on this?
No, just to say I think it's a great motion, and I think it's very fitting for the sit-in and the work the female workers did at that time to fight for their civil right, which was an equal pay. And you know, as Lynn's just said, I mean, we've moved on a lot over the years, but still there are inequalities in pay, and albeit not as much so, thank goodness. But sadly, we still see it in other parts of the world. But yeah, I'm more than glad to support the motion today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim. From one Jim to another, Jim Clarkey.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. It'd be remiss of me not to comment on this. As probably most of you know, I probably stayed about a few hundred yards from the factory, and a lot of my family and friends actually worked in the factory. In fact, I told my sister, "Did you know it was 40 years?" And she was asking, "Where does time go?" Just want to correct a couple of things. Got to remember, they were going to close down the factory. They were moving the factory to everything that Lynn says is right about the unequal pay, but they were going to move the factory to Ireland because they were getting better rates in Ireland, and that's why they were moving the factory. So the dispute wasn't about equal pay, it was about the right to work. And I know Lynn didn't say that, but I think Jim was commenting that. It is important to remember these were ordinary women in the main. A couple of my friends did the work, as funny enough, as machinists, as machine tool workers. But I think it was solidarity, and I look at the pictures and I look to see who I could recognise from the time. They've certainly changed, but people that you still know and still are friends with are probably quite proud of what went through at that point in time. Unfortunately, the factory did eventually close. It went to a company that were selling Brand X jeans. So if anybody's got a Brand X jeans, it will come from them. But unfortunately, Lee did move out. Lee's did eventually move out of the factory, which was quite sad. But I thank Christopher and Lynn bringing it, because I didn't really know it was 40 years. I should have, but I didn't. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. We appear to have a degree of consensus, Gerard.
Provost, I don't think there's anything contrary being moved. I don't know if there's any other contributions.
No, I don't. There don't appear to be. So we agree with the recommendation.
Unanimously approved, Provost. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 8 is the COVID-19 update report. It's a 13-page report, and each paragraph from 4.1 to 16.1 and the appendix is essentially only a summary of a great deal of detailed work. Martin, would you like to speak to the report?
Thank you, Provost. I suppose I should first of all start off with some generalities. You'll note that in section 4.1, we say that the rate per 100k has declined to 87 at the time of writing. That was this time last week, and actually it went back up. The 87 was an underestimate. However, I'm happy to say that at this point, we are at 75 cases per 100,000. And there's certainly been a downward trend in the last couple of days. What seems to be happening here is we seem to be getting little plateaus where it stays roughly the same for a few days and then goes down again. So at the moment, the move is in the correct direction. So I'll maybe just quickly go through the sort of main sections. Section 6 of the report is just the normal HR update, as has been presented to Policy and Resources Committees and Policy and Resources Exec Sub previously. Section 7 is an update on grants to businesses thus far and updated as of last week. And I probably should apologise, there's a seeming contradiction, I think, in the last paragraph of Section 7, where it says that the discretionary grants is closed and then goes on to say that they're now open. The discretionary grant scheme did reopen, and that's an error, so please accept my apologies for that. Section 8 covers vaccinations. Now, I'm sure you're probably all aware, we stepped up the vaccinations quite markedly, or rather the Health Board stepped up the vaccinations quite markedly last week. However, there was then a slowdown this week, and actually the mass vaccination centres opened for the first day this week today. They are open again on Sunday, and then they're open intermittently over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Now, the reasons for that, I think, have been rehearsed in the media and are to do with vaccine supply. And we are hopeful the centres effectively are ready to operate 6 days a week or 7 days a week as required. And hopefully they will be back up running at that kind of output fairly soon. Section 9 covers testing. Both testing within the council workforce and testing in the wider community. I can probably let members know at this point that we are looking at setting up an asymptomatic testing site. It will be a small unit, initially looking at levels in individual neighbourhoods, and we'll be able to move it as required between sites. That will be in operation from the 1st of March, and I will share some more information with members as soon as it's feasible on where that's going to be and what the kind of message for the public will be on that. It will initially, they'll be staffed by the Army, we're being provided with the Army support for 5 weeks, after which there's an expectation that if the site is to continue to operate, that we will replace them with council staff. Section 10 is our usual humanitarian assistance update. Section 11 is an update on regulation, and Section 12 covers events, and there was more detail on events in the report to the Policy and Resources Committee on the 2nd of February. Sections 13, 14 and 15 are all arising from remits from the Policy and Resources Committee. Section 13, an update on streaming of funerals. Section 14 on cruise ship visits to Inverclyde, which, as you'll probably understand, are kind of slightly up in the air at this moment in time. And Section 15, an update on the impact of coronavirus on the election planning. Last, but by no means least, Section 16 covers an amendment to the tender opening and covers the recommendation 3.2 in the report. I'm happy, or my colleagues will be happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Martin, for that quick periphrasis, as they say, wherever they say that. I have a question from Stephen. Stephen.
Thanks, Bro. There's actually a couple of questions. I suppose the first one's probably for Martin in terms of the streaming of funerals. I see the report saying a timeline is being prepared, but it would be helpful to get an indication. Are we talking about weeks, months, or whatever? Because, I mean, funerals at this moment are very, very distressing for families. I know I was speaking to a friend today who just buried her mother yesterday, and I can but sympathise with what families are going through when they're burying loved ones at this point in time. So it'd be useful to get some sort of firmer thoughts on where we're going. The second question is for the Chief Executive in relation to the Scottish Parliament elections. I have to say, as an employer, I am very concerned about whether this election can be delivered safely. I've seen in the media in recent days coverage of the Catalan election, and have to say I'm very concerned to see the sort of queues outside polling stations at that particular election. I also noted the very, very strict PPE that was given to staff who are working at the elections as well. We've seen some evidence from the American election that staff were at a greater risk of catching COVID as well. So I've got serious reservations. I think it's very difficult to run a proper election in the current environment when parties can't really properly campaign. So I'm not convinced it's going to be a fair election. But I suppose in terms of your responsibilities as the returning officer and the chief executive of the council, I'm looking for sort of your assurances or views that you can actually run a fair election. It'd be useful to understand in a sense what responsibilities you have with regard to that, or whether you just have to do what you're told by the Electoral Management Board, because I think there are growing concerns around delivering a safe election. We've not got any indication at this point in time when we're going to come out of the current lockdown. So where are we going to be on the 6th of May? I know the trade unions nationally have raised concerns about it. I don't know if locally they've raised concerns as well, but I really have serious concerns, and I'd like the Chief Executive to address those concerns.
Thanks very much, Stephen. The first question, I think Martin would be the most proper person to address it. That was about funerals.
So I'm actually going to exhibit slopey shoulders here and maybe ask Scott if he can give us an update, as it now sits with Gail's service.
Not good enough.
Thank you, Provost. Clarification: the challenges in doing work in the crematorium are that sadly in the winter time the number of services are much greater than in the summertime. And what we need to do work like this is creating voids and having days through the week where there are no services, and you can do drilling in the building, you can do ducting and trenching. So we're looking just now towards the late spring, early summer. We have also to be mindful that internal work should not be non-essential. So I can't give you a firm timeline, but I can say that an indicative timeline would be late spring, early summer.
Okay, thank you. Aubrey, I think Stephen's second part of Stephen's question was addressed to yourself.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I mean, I would agree with Councillor McCabe that I also have got concerns about running an election, particularly at the current level of infection rates here and no doubt in the rest of Scotland. So I think that will be a critical element in terms of any ultimate decision that is taken, although as it stands, the Electoral Management Board is of the view that elections can proceed. I have a significant concern that those individuals who will feel that they won't get involved in any postal voting but will usually come out and put a mark on the ballot papers will be obliged to feel that they have to come out, but will maybe be scared to come out. So in that regard, we may end up in a situation where we have got a democratic deficit occurring as a result of undertaking action during the middle of a pandemic. I am also aware, and members may not be, that a number of by-elections were postponed prior to Christmas. And my understanding is that that was because of local COVID conditions. So that would concur probably with the view that maybe Councillor McCabe has. As regard his comments about a fair election, I mean, if we do undertake an election, it will be a fair election. All the teams that are involved in terms of the right across the board in Scotland, a fair election will take place. The question is whether everybody will come out to vote that want to come out to vote, do come out to vote, but feel that they can't come out to vote as a result of being worried or concerned. Yes, I think the whole issue of how we undertake a variety of different activities, including postal vote opening. So there's no doubt about it that if the infection rate prevails, then undertaking a range of activities is a risk element, and our job is to mitigate those risks. I am also aware that there are a number of other returning officers have got concern about mitigating the risks. So it's been kept under review. I think the Electoral Management Board has undertaken to do that. I have certainly raised concerns with them. But as it stands, we are making all preparations, and no doubt the monitoring officer will confirm that that is taking place. And there's a lot could be said, Provost, but I think I will leave it at that.
Thanks, Aubrey, and thanks, Scott. Stephen, does that address your questions?
Yeah, but just to clarify, in terms of a fair election, I wasn't casting any aspersions on Mr. Fawcett and his staff. It was simply the fact that political parties can't campaign at this point in time. You can't knock doors, you can't deliver leaflets. It's illegal, and who knows how long this is going to persist. So it's not going to be a normal election. And I think, and because of that, it potentially favours some parties rather than others.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I'll move on to Lynn. Councillor Quinn.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Yeah, I've just got a couple of questions on the election. It's just a minor point. Obviously, that's following on for the discussions we've just had. Does the council plan to maybe encourage more people to elect for a postal vote. I mean, I know myself, I'm normally an in-person voter who loves to go to the polling station, but this time we've registered to postal vote, so I'm not sure about if that's permissible or not, but to actually encourage more people to do the postal vote, then there'll be less people turning up on the day. So it's just maybe just if it's been considered. My second point is on the use of schools for polling stations. This has kind of came up before. Obviously, we understand, we realise that our children have lost quite a lot of their education up to now, and if fingers crossed they are allowed to go back soon, that potentially we're looking at 1, maybe 2 days where the kids will lose days of education when it's really critical. And secondly, obviously, parents who've had to then look at childcare will potentially have childcare issues. So is there any way that we can review those? I think we've got 3 schools and a nursery. Is there any way we can look at alternative accommodations for those polling stations to ensure our kids can go to school on those days?
Aubrey, would you like to answer that? Aubrey, you're on mute. That's it.
Apologies, Provost. I didn't pick up that. Could it be repeated, Provost?
I think if Lynn doesn't mind, I mean, she'll correct me if I'm wrong. The first question was about how we encourage, possibly like postal voting, voters to vote, and the second one was about the use of a school or schools for as polling stations.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Quinn, I didn't pick up all of that. So in terms of using schools, we try to avoid using schools where we can. And Gerard will give you the rundown of how we try and get alternative locations. And the first one item, Provost, because this is not getting very clear, was? It was
means of encouraging.
Yes, yes.
Particularly postal votes. Is that right, Lynn?
Yeah, it's just whether we can. I don't know what the rules are, but are we able to encourage postal votes, or is that viewed as influence election?
What we do encourage, and what we're doing as part of the council tax collection notices that are going out, is we put a general direction on there that the elections are taking place and they can apply for a postal vote, and we give them directions to do so. So that will be coming out as part of that notice. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you. All right, then.
Yeah, it's just about the schools, though. I think obviously we're in a unique situation where our kids have.
Sorry, Lynn, could I bring in Gerard on that?
On the school, yeah. Okay,
yes,
thanks.
On the schools. Gerard.
Thank you, Provost. This council has issued an instruction which the returning officer has ensured that the election team follows, which is to move as much as possible away from any aspect of the learning estate for election purposes. And I have to say, if you look back over the previous past approved polling schemes, we've got a good record in making sure that we move away, and we use very few schools normally in normal elections these days. In fact, we've got it down to 3 learning estate facilities themselves. I think Councillor Quinn makes a very relevant point, however, which we do try to bring forward in the Chief Executive's update. In terms of the polling scheme that is provided to members, we have had to, regrettably, extend, and this is the first time we've ever gone back the other way. We're forever coming back and reducing the learning estate. But in the context of the systems that we must apply, as Chief Executive's already referred to the directions that are issued by the Electoral Management Board, we have to ensure that there is a clear, safe, one-way system into facilities. This has caused us inordinate problems in the period from early November when we've been revising this scheme. But one of our facilities, which is the very useful and very busy facility at the South West Library, just cannot be used. And it is regrettable, but absolutely necessary if we're serving that population base in that area, that regrettably we move back to Lady Alice, that we so, I think, well succeeded in not using before, for all of the reasons that Councillor Quinn makes. Provost, the polling scheme that's in front of you just now tries to minimise any impact on the learning estate. I have to fairly advise the Council, Councillor Quinn, that the Chief Executive's powers might well be tested in the terms of providing suitable polling places, even with the scheme that's there. And we might have to even go to other contingencies as well if we absolutely have to, but I emphasise absolutely have to. And as the Chief Executive has already said on separate matter, because I cut out a little too, the Council can encourage the registration to vote, and in so doing can refer to the many ways of doing absent voting through proxy or postal voting. I hope that helps, Provost.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question for Chris Curley. At the moment, I can only see a darkened room. Oh yes, I see you. I see you, Chris. There was a light glowing in the dark. Is it kind of a metaphor for you?
I'll take that, Provost. My question was in relation to the change in standing orders for contracts, is whether or not this is meant to be a permanent change or it's going to be what do you call it, a temporary one to do the crisis. The reason being, it seems to be quite specific. So I just wondered if it's going to be a permanent change you're proposing, and also how does this procedure compare with other councils?
Thank you, Chris. I'm not quite sure which officer would be best placed to answer this. Would it be Alan? If not,
sorry, Provost. I'm happy to help out. If Stuart's there as well, because he's currently got line management responsibility for procurement. But my understanding is this is a permanent change, which was considered by the corporate management team, and is very much in line with just about every other council in Scotland. Inverclyde had quite a, if I can put it this way, old-fashioned way of dealing with it, and the remote opening by procurement officers only is absolutely the vast majority of councils in Scotland do that.
Thanks very much, Alan. Does that answer your question, Chris?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Provost.
Very happy with it. Right, good. Natasha, Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Provost. My 2 points are around the funerals and elections this year. So my first point on the funerals is that I'm quite disheartened and disappointed that we haven't got this set up. I know that some of the local authorities, such as Petherick and Ross, have set up such schemes, and I know that some funeral directors have been making availability for streaming services. And I understand completely what Scott was saying about obviously the need time to go in and things, and we're trying to minimise indoor use. But I am very aware that there are alternative means such as 4G cards and dongles that could be used. So could I maybe implore that we try to either send it to the relevant committee or try to get in place something a bit sooner, because we are very aware that our death rate, especially with COVID, had went up over recent weeks. And the fact that during winter we do have a much higher death rate. So it is a bit disheartening to hear that it is still going to be a while and it could potentially be the end of the spring. The other point that I had to make was around elections and are they going to be safe? And I appreciate that my colleagues have brought that up and that Aubrey has also spoken on this. I do have concerns around whether people will sign up for postal votes and whether people will go out to post those votes if they don't feel safe and if they are shielding in the house. I also have a question around, are we going to have what's been dubbed the zombie hour that Catalonia had, where those who had tested positive for COVID would be allowed to go out and vote if they weren't able to or didn't want to sign up for postal voting? And is it prudent for us to be going ahead with an election when we can't do simple things like go buy clothes in a town centre? And I understand, obviously, I am a huge advocate for democracy and making sure that people's voices are heard, but I'm not convinced that this election will be able to be wholly safe without endangering either our constituents or those who are fulfilling their civic duty, whether it be polling agents or being part of the count. I do have sincere concerns around this, and I do wonder, should we be should we be writing as a local authority to raise these concerns, not to say necessarily to postpone the election, but to raise the fact that we do have concerns of safety and well-being.
Okay, thank you, Natasha. Is Scott still with us? Scott?
Thank you, Provost. Yes, if you like, I'll cover
the first one was in the use of superior technology for funerals.
Yes, thank you, Provost. If I refer to 13.1 in the report, we did actually investigate using 4G technology, and we tried to engage external experts to do this on our behalf so that undertakers could go to specified contractors who could broadcast. Unfortunately, we did not get interest from the contractors to do this. That would have solved the problem in our view. But what we do, though, is give the opportunity for mourners to do this exercise through the undertakers. And the undertakers can arrange for 4G broadcasting set up by the family or by relations. And a number of crematoriums in Scotland do this just now. So there is the potential to broadcast in 4G, and I believe this has happened on a number of times. But definitely the long-term solution and the best solution is to have hardware connection into the crematorium.
Thank you very much, Scott. The question Natasha raised about elections, I think it's really boils down to ensuring the normal turnout, or even better than that. Aubrey, is there anything in place to do that, to ensure a high turnout?
Well, clearly adverts are going out, and people are being made very much aware that an election is going on in May. I think Councillor Murphy made reference to the fact that what about those individuals who are maybe have been tested and have been affected by or infected by COVID? There are mechanisms being put in place to allow for late registration for postal vote up to, I think it's 5 o'clock on election day, and Gerald will remind me if I've picked that up right from the Electoral Management Board. So I think every effort is being made by the various bodies involved in this. One, to try and make it as safe as possible, and two, make it as flexible as possible for people to vote. And I don't know whether Gerard wants to add anything to that, Provost.
Provost, with some degree of trepidation, the 5 p.m. is the spoilt or lost papers and any emergency proxies. So the Chief Executive is responding to that period that I've never heard referred to, that period of diagnosis or partial isolation. That would be covered by an emergency proxy. And as the Chief Executive has said, that could be applied for during the course of the day of the poll. Now, that's of benefit for those persons who might, within the range of self-isolation, come down with suspected COVID. It doesn't, however, actually address the other aspects of the transmission of necessary papers from one person to the other to the actual emergency proxy himself or herself. So it just makes that point about participation or contact with other persons, which would of course be sought to be minimised. I just make the point because the postal vote latest application day is much earlier than that, and you'll forgive me, I think it might be the 6th or the 9th of April, but please do not quote me on that. I can clarify that it's a much earlier date for postal applications. There is a second issue, but I'll clarify that for all members just so that that date is available to them all for their assistance.
Thanks to all three officers who responded there. Is Natasha?
Yes, thanks, Provost. Will people be told that they can apply for proxy if they do test positive or have to last minute self-isolate? And if it is earlier than usual, what is the logic behind this? Because obviously we are expecting there to be more postal votes this year with the current ongoing crisis. Apologies, I've got a dog that's needing wanting fed, sorry. And And also my final question was that I'd mentioned was around should we be writing to raise our concerns, because I'm aware that there have been representations made to the management group already. I was just wondering, should we make further representations ourselves? Once again, not to politicise and say we should or shouldn't postpone the election, but just to raise our concerns.
Well, I don't know who's going to answer that. Gerard.
Provost, I can assure Councillor Murphy that there is, through the Electoral Commission, a scheme of intended advertisement to alert all members of the public, me included, of the last days and the relative dates for the applications for postal votes, normal, if I may put it that way, proxies and emergency proxies. So there will be a scheme in place with a definitive timetable. I will make it my business to circulate to all members of the council with those dates in them. Lastly, I have to jump the middle point. Lastly, there is, of course, representations being made through COSLA relative to the holding of the election, and that has been dealt with separately. I cannot advise further in terms of any correspondence, but I do give Councillor Murphy the assurance that this is being discussed at COSLA level. I'm afraid I did miss the middle point, Councillor Murphy, and I wasn't too sure about which point you were referring. I hope that helps all the same.
Okay, yes, thank you very much, Gerard. Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you.
Councillor Alfield.
Thanks very much, Provost. Again, it's another one on the Scottish parliamentary elections. In the papers that we have in front of us, under 15.4, it says that it's crucial to have a team of experienced polling and count staff available. So my first question would be, how confident are we that we will have such a team available to us? Because certainly I'm aware of a couple of people that I know who regularly volunteer for both the polling stations and the count, who are not going to do that this year. So is there a date or a time that when we can be assured that we will have sufficient staff to be able to control that? And I guess my second question is there such a thing as a drop dead date if in fact the election has to be rescheduled? Is there a date that a decision has to be made on such an eventuality? Thanks.
You see that last quick question, your second question there, Ronnie, I wasn't quite sure about it. You mentioned a drop dead date now. How
yeah,
would that affect things?
What I'm saying, Martin, is there such a thing as a drop dead date if in fact the decision is made to reschedule the parliamentary elections in May?
Yeah.
By what date would we have to make that decision?
See. Right, thanks, Ronnie. Gerard, it's either Gerard or Aubrey who would answer this. Gerard?
Provost, if Aubrey would permit me to do that. The first point in terms of paragraph 15.4, the entire election team itself is made up of people from the whole range of the community. And I'm afraid I can't give any assurances other than say that we are dependent upon participation from experienced persons. We do our best to train those who are not experienced to provide a degree of resilience for the future and to build the entire team. But Councillor Alfield makes the precise point. Even with people who are disposed to assist what has been an exceptional team effort in the past, they might very well have concerns. And indeed, those concerns might not be so evident today, but who knows, in terms of any aspect of progression or variant of the disease, whether those concerns might be magnified or changed in some other way adverse to the running of an election. The only thing that I can say is that we have been in contact with the entire contingent of staff. The response, and I'm talking about external to the council here, that the response has been good. I wouldn't put it any differently. I wouldn't say anything other than good. But that is very much in terms of an expression of interest at this stage and will wholly change, I think, dependent on circumstances, potentially either way. potentially either in terms of greater vaccination and greater security in the population, or indeed less so. But I cannot give the assurances other than say that we will be in contact with the team and will provide safe and checked protocols to ensure as far as possible that all members of staff and all voters at the election are dealt with in a way that is in terms of all expected public health guidance. So we've got systems in place, and as this report notes, and I won't go on about that, we're doing risk assessments for each and every venue, which we've never been required to do before, and that's in hand. Secondly, Councillor Alfeld's point is in relation to dates of no return. In terms of the local issue affecting this, it is recognised in the Act regulating the Scottish parliamentary election that local situation might prevail, requiring the returning officer, in consultation with the Electoral Management Board, to consider local arrangements and any postponement or change to the local election. So there are emergency provisions within the Act that would deal with those specific constituency issues. However, in terms of the wider Scottish parliamentary issue as to whether there is a date of no return or not, I cannot comment on that. That's a national decision. All that I'm aware of is that there is a local provision for emergencies if that were to occur. I hope that helps, Provost.
Thank you very much. William, and I know that there are several other people, but you're quite happy with that?
Yeah, that's fine. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. David, I must apologise. Have you been waiting for some time?
It's all right. It's all right. I'm quite comfortable. It wasn't a vote this time. And I'd like to thank Graham for his support on the 2 occasions this afternoon. In terms of, I agree with Stephen. I think this election is really very tricky. I agree with Ronnie. I'm hearing for people who are keen to serve. I hear of locations. I'm trying to help with Upper Port Glasgow Social Club, where the staff are absolutely dead against being any way involved. I think we're working away on that one. But my question is regarding St Mary's at Bardraney Avenue. It doesn't have a way in and a way out, so we're using Bogleston Community Centre this time. Can you tell me, we will go back to St Mary's for the local elections next year? And I really must declare an interest. It's where I get my best vote in Port Glasgow.
Right. It's to help return David to the council. Can you help him read St Mary's?
Provost, I will answer this question as objectively as I possibly can. I have to say St Mary's has helped us tremendously in the past. We would undoubtedly continue to use St Mary's. It's been a real find for us and it'd be really good. We can't use it on this occasion because of the one-way access requirements. We even looked at ways to see if we could possibly do anything with the one-way, but there's such a slope, as Councillor Wilson knows, at the back of the hall that we couldn't actually do it. So I'm glad to say that we've had lots of cooperation from Inverclyde Leisure Trust to go back into Bogleston, which we used before, but it would be our intention to go back to St Mary's in the future. That's my objective response to Councillor Wilson. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerard.
David, do you feel a bit more secure?
Provost is
absolutely. That's me on a winner.
Provost, if I would just maybe add to Gerard's response by saying, however, if Bogleston Community Centre proves successful, we might review that comment by Gerard.
Yes, I think we should.
Spoil sport.
Robert Moran, Councillor Moran. Robert, you're on mute. You're off mute.
Can I just say, Provost, I think all the points I'm going to raise have been covered already, so nothing else to add.
No, thanks very much. That's what happens, Robert, you know. It happens to me often. Chano, I think you have a point to make.
Hold on, Provost, I'm trying to blooming thing to work.
Use a hammer.
I'll use a head. Can you hear me?
I think so. You just said, can you hear me?
Right.
I can't hear you. I can't hear you. You're rocking back and forth and forth.
I don't worry. It's that.
I can hear you now.
That's it now.
That's it.
Okay. See, that's what happens when I rock back and forward.
Right.
Anyway, there's one undertaker locally I know who actually does that screening, and they do copies for people so they can do it later on. And there's other ones tell them, look, there's what you can do, and they do it themselves and tell the people that's outside how to watch it on their phones. And that's the one good thing about that right now. It gets them round. Now, I think it'll be Martin that'll answer this one. If we've got postal votes, if I go to the library right now and hand books in, it's left for 3 days before anybody can, they're sterilised or something for 3 days. What happens with these postal votes? Because if I'm an affected person and hand it in, does a virus last for 3 days, or what happens? So these things should be checked to make sure, one, the staff that's got them and takes them up, that they're safe, and that's it. So that's one of my worries.
Thanks. I'm not sure, is Gerard again not the most appropriate person to respond here? No?
Provost, for the postal vote opening in general, we will have a protocol. It will involve different venues for postal vote opening, and it will involve staff being really spaced, separate, physically distanced, and they will be provided with gloves and all forms of hand sanitisers. The same process, because Councillor Rebecca's point is well made, in that postal votes will be handed in to these buildings. Postal votes will be delivered directly to to polling stations, even though they're postal votes. So postal votes will come in a whole variety of different ways, and a protocol is in place and will be further developed in terms of gloves, sanitisers, and physical distancing and space to take account of that very point about potential transmissibility from paper. Thank you, Provost.
Chairman, does that answer your question?
No, and I'm trying to get through. What about a mask, Jerry?
What about the use of masks?
For staff who are going to be there for considerable periods of time, we are looking, and I can't be definitive as yet, Provost, but we are having perspex screens certainly, and possibly those perspex visors and or masks. So all of these items are being looked at.
Thanks very much. Thank you. So, do you agree with the recommendations?
Provost.
So, look, Jim, apologies. I've got a note here that says in capital letters, remember Jim McLeod. And even with that, I forgot to ask you. Sorry, Jim, my apologies.
That's okay, Provost. I've got a couple of things. First of all, regarding the funerals, I do really hope that something can be done. I share Councillor McCabe's sentiments. It's a very difficult time for many people. I've had 2 relatives sadly pass away in the last 7 or 8 months, and I couldn't attend their funerals. And a very close friend as well. But I was fortunate in that my friend that passed away, her funeral in St John's was streamed, so I was able to watch the funeral, and that gave me some comfort. So it did. But it's a very, very difficult thing, and hopefully it can be resolved, because it's a very difficult time for many people. regarding vaccinations, I think it's great what's been done so far. The uptake of people going for vaccinations has been tremendous. So it has, and I have to congratulate everyone involved in the process, our health social care staff, our staff in the council, the health board, the army, and everyone else that's been involved. It's been absolutely great, and you know, you've got my thanks. Everybody's got my thanks for that. The question I have with regards to that is, obviously there are some people who are declining getting a vaccination for whatever reasons. And you know, I just wonder, you know, how much of a worry that is for officers, and at what point would you be happy with the, you know, the entire population of Inverclyde? Well, maybe not the entire population, but what sort of percentage would you be comfortable with of people being vaccinated in Inverclyde? You know, I'm thinking about the term it's used about herd immunity. So what would you be looking at for herd immunity in Inverclyde?
Thanks very much, Jim. I think Martin would be best able to answer these questions.
So I may pass over to Louise on this, on some of it, but I suppose what I probably have to say first off is, unfortunately, we don't have detailed figures and uptake for all age groups in Inverclyde as yet who've been offered the vaccine, and that's more to do with just not having the stats available. I am aware that there are unpublished statistics that the Health Board have. What I can say, though, is that the uptake that kind of we've been informed of, and certainly the uptake in the older age groups, care home residents, those over 80, those over 75, are extremely high. So there's been an issue, and that's at a Health Board base level, and I think at Inverclyde level as well for what the HSCP has been delivering. So as yet, there hasn't been an issue with sort of vaccine hesitancy as such. I suppose I would have to say here that I'm obviously not an epidemiologist. I'm not sure what level the herd immunity has been set, but herd immunity really works on a kind of national basis. It's not really a local thing. All I would say is no doubt there'll be a very close eye kept on it as the vaccination program's rolled out, because we're more likely to get lower uptakes in the younger age groups who maybe might not see the benefit quite so much. I don't know if Louise has got anything to add to that.
Louise?
Just through yourself, Provost, just to add to Martin, we did have a problem in December time originally in relation to the care home staff, particularly younger care home staff who were obviously worried about the impact in relation to fertility. We did some work, we did some seminars, and we got our clinical director to go to some of the care homes, and I'm very pleased that the uptake has been very positive in relation to the health and social care staff, and in particular the health and social care staff who work in care homes. Martin's right, we do have figures, but they're not published yet, and they haven't been verified, but I'm able to say that the vaccinations that the health and social care staff have been involved in, which are care homes, the over 80s, the housebound, the over 70s, are extremely high. And Martin and I and Alan are going to do a presentation to members and all members briefing and give an update in relation to vaccine next week.
Jim, those were two quite full answers, you know, very full answers.
Yeah, can I?
You want to ask another question, right?
Yeah, can I just say, Provost, thank you very much to Martin and Louise for those answers. You know, in my position as health and social care spokesperson for the SNP group, I do have regular meetings with Louise, and you know, I have asked some of these questions in the past. So it is good to see. Certainly, the uptake amongst older people so far has been absolutely tremendous, and I congratulate everybody for you know, for getting it done. But it's just as I say, I was just wondering if we knew what would be regarded as a sort of safe limit, herd immunity, whatever word. And I take on board what Martin said about national, but you know, everything is local, is national, and we're part of the national setup. I mean, imagine the herd immunity was set, for example, at 80% or 90% of the population of Scotland. That if we were falling back at 70 or 75%, it's about what we could do to try and remedy that or whatever. So that's just the point I was trying to make. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. Thank you. Do you agree with the recommendation? I take it we agree with the recommendation. We are now on to agenda item number 9. It's about the online committee cycle. And personally, I would say we're not out of this thing yet. And currently, this council is a lifeline service that demands officers-based attention. But I'll let Gerard explain.
Thank you, Provost. The report sets out that we're in the current stage of the national lockdown, and the P&R committee agreed in January that we would submit reports on an expedited business-only basis. We're still in that lockdown level for this current stage, and the expedited business-only reporting format does significantly free up officers from across all services in order that they can deal with the urgent operational matters that you would require council officers to deal with in relation to the emergency. Provost, I can understand that it's fundamental that all of the elected members of the council be satisfied with their formal governance systems. The expedited reports at this stage of the emergency are entirely justified in that they significantly free up officers, and I suggest to members that they do not reduce the level of scrutiny or the level of review, as is exemplified by today's council, for example. And the officers of the council can't identify any reduction in any aspect of performance management reporting or financial reporting, and there's no deficiency relative to scrutiny, to review or debate. If there were that, Provost, I would be obliged in my role as monitoring officer to identify that to you, and I have to offer that to you as my comment. However, I thoroughly and completely accept it's entirely at the discretion of the members to decide on their preferred reporting arrangements. I do recommend, as does the CMT, that the continuation of the expedited business-only format is justified in this current stage of the COVID emergency. I would ask that that be approved, at least for the imminent future and for the next cycle, Provost, if not cycles. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerard. Well, that's fairly clear. It's very, well, fairly clear. It's very clear. Channel, I understand you have a question.
Yep.
You're on mute.
I know. Not now. How's that? You hear me now?
I can.
Right. Thanks, Provost. It's on 4.6. We had a meeting which set up another committee regarding the hospital, and we're fortunate enough to get plans that they've got, what they're hoping to do in the hospital, and we can't meet, they say, because of, I'm not asking for officers to meet, but surely the committee members should go through that agenda, or go through the whole planning, check it up, so that we know when we get into a meeting exactly what it is that they're telling us and what they're not telling us, because there's 138 pages in it, and there's a whole load of things that's telling us, and yet we're not getting together to turn, when I mean together, I mean like this, to understand what it is they're talking about and what they're planning for Inverclyde Royal. And I think that's daft. The opportunity is there for us to have an hour or half an hour talking on this particular stuff. I'm not talking about officers being there, I'm talking about members of the committee having a discussion on that. And I think that's the way forward, because there's a lot of stuff we don't understand.
Channel, that meeting you're talking about, Channel, is it a council meeting?
Yes. Oh, no, sorry.
Yes.
No, it'd be for the members of that committee. In fact, it'd be Robert's actually the convener.
The Social Care Committee, right?
No, okay. It's part of. So Robert's the one that would answer whether it's possible or not possible.
Well, I'll relay that question back to Gerard. Gerard, can you answer Councillor Becky's question?
Thank you, Provost. I attempt in that paragraph, paragraph 4.6, as Councillor Becky has said, to just reflect on this. There are a whole range of ways to ensure that members are satisfactorily, and more than that, completely briefed, so that they are thoroughly informed. That need not be through the formal committee process. And I know that all of the corporate directors and service directors to be through the CMT are signed up to ensuring that there is no diminution in the circulation of information, just that it's perhaps done in a different way that allows officers, when it comes to the formal reporting systems of the council, to focus on the financial and performance arrangements of the council, the management arrangements, performance management aspects of the council, any items of new business that are brought forward in terms of things that members require to consider and make decisions on, and any confidential aspects that would be attached in an appendix. That system of expedited committee reports allows a business focus on decisions, but all of the corporate directors and CMT are signed up to ensure that members have the same amount of information, but through the alternative existing means that we did actually review through the council's administration mid-term review, through the council itself, through technical briefings, through all members' briefings, and through obviously use of video conferencing. I'm afraid I can't answer on the specific point that Councillor Rebecca is raising, but there are alternative means available to ensure that that information is available.
Provost, can I come in on Councillor Rebecca's point?
Yes, yes.
Councillor Rebecca is referring to the working group on hospital services that I proposed be set up at the last Health and Social Care meeting. And we specifically agreed that we would meet when officers had the time to support the working group, and obviously the health board had the time to engage with us. And given where we are in the stage of the pandemic, I think it's not appropriate that we meet at this time. That does not preclude the elected members who are on the working group meeting as elected members. All it requires is one of the elected members to invite others to a WebEx meeting, and we can have an informal discussion. But that would be what it would be, an informal discussion, not a formal working group meeting of the council where we'd be minuting decisions, considering reports. So we really are to understand the pressures that are on our staff within the council, particularly within the Health and Social Care Partnership, and the enormous pressure and strain there is on officers within the health board. Huge strain. So I think we need to be mindful of that.
Provost, can I come back in? I don't want officers. That was the first thing I said. I don't want officers to be involved in this. I think what I was saying was we have this book, it tells us everything that they're doing, and we'll call it our plans ahead. These will change as well because medicine changes. But all I'm asking is that we have the right as a councillors to meet, discuss it, because there are a lot of councillors who don't know what happens in the hospital other than again there as a patient or a visitor, and it's got it there. At least that you're in and you're getting the information. It was good enough to get the information. That was all I was asking for. And I want to know
what I'm saying to you, Chana.
Robert would have that, and as he chairs it, it's his. Well, it's my duty to ask the convener.
Chana, what I would say to you is all you need to do is pick up the phone to Robert, have a chat with Robert. Robert then can speak to the other members of the working group, and if they want to have an informal meeting, an informal meeting can be organised, right? But that's what it would be An informal meeting, not a formal meeting.
No, I totally agree with you. I'm not arguing on that. That's what I'm saying. Totally agree. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Channel.
Thank you.
Chris Curley. Robert. Yes. Robert.
Yeah, when we decided to set up the working group. After we made that decision, we were issued with moving forward together, which is the plan for the Inverclyde, for the Greater Glasgow Clyde Health Board. We were issued with that this week, and Councillor Becky quite rightly has received it like the rest of us. So he's wanting to discuss the contents of that report, which I think is quite fair. We're not actually asked to engage with the board members to come to talk to us, but the document has been issued to the members. So I would think it's right and proper that we could have a discussion on it. If not, what was the sense of issuing the document to the members? So I agree with Councillor Becky. I'll undertake to write to everyone, and we can have a meeting, as Councillor says. It'll be an off the record meeting, whatever, but we'll have one anyway.
Right. Now, just a second, I want to try and establish this. I don't intend to impose draconian powers on you, but I've got a list of 6 people who wish to speak. They have all entered that on the chat function, and I'm taking them one by one. If you have something terribly urgent to say, please wait until it's your turn. I will invite you all to speak. Chris Curley.
Thank you, Provost. My point is on paragraph, where is it now? I can't see, it's dark in here. 4.4. And it's related to the delegated powers that officers have to be making decisions. Now, obviously as a group, we've got concerns that basically what they call that there's not been enough political engagement with respect to decisions that have been made, and that some of them may be moving on from operational decisions into more political decisions. And though we're in favour of expediting the business, etc., and keeping the reports to a short thing, we want to make sure that there is that political engagement in the decisions that have been made. If it was purely an operational decision that money's been moved from one place to another place, that's great, fine. But if it's a situation where we're getting decisions being made about how money's being spent, we think there should be the opportunity for political engagement at some level prior to that decision being made.
Christopher, thank you. Chris, Gerard, would you like to speak to Chris?
Provost, we do have the delegated powers that are set out in the January meeting of the Policy Committee, where we do have delegated powers to spend money from council approved budgets to deal with those operational matters. Now, when these decision log items are considered, they are considered by the CMT and are very clearly considered in terms of the scope of those powers, and I would have to perhaps discuss with Councillor Curley which of those decisions has that political overtone to that. I would think that the CMT are wishing to use those delegated powers in the terms that have been offered and decided by the PNR committee, which is to take account of the fact that we are in an emergency situation, and subject to the terms of those decisions being made in conformity with established council policy from established council budgets. These are, by definition, operational decisions that have been remitted to the officers to deal with in the light of the emergency, the scrutiny coming from the service committees or from the Policy and Resources Committee itself. So I can see quite clearly how that function works in terms of the speed of decision making, the focus of decision making, which is after all what we're wanting to achieve as a council in the emergency situation. So I do think that scheme is there. I don't know if there's any suggestions that that be altered. If there's a suggestion that be altered, we would of course have to consider that as officers. Thank you, Provost.
Happy with that, Chris?
Is it me you've called in, Provost?
No, I'm still talking to your roommate, Chris Curley.
Apologies.
Thanks. My computer is giving up now. It's well, this time my Wi-Fi is working fine. It's just my keyboard stopped working.
That's reassuring.
Well, I've had to move to a different place in the house. No, I think that the concern, I suppose the example I'd give would be the decision by officers to increase the spending on what do you call it, on the free school meals. I think that's a good example where nobody's decided on that decision. The decision seems perfectly reasonable, but I think that I think it's moving from an operation to maybe a policy point there. I think a little bit of political engagement would have been good on that particular decision, because how does that interface with other things going forward and other decisions that we may wish to make from a political point of view going forward. So I think that there is a grey area where it moves from operational to what do you call it, to policy, and we don't want to get away with it, but I think it'd be worthwhile just for there to be that engagement at a political level. I think when we were looking at this before, we thought the situation would be that you'd have a discussion with maybe what do you call it, the people represent what they call it, say for instance the group leader, minority leaders, etc. Just a quick call. This is what we think we're doing. Do you see any sort of issues? Just to make sure that we're getting a heads up before the decision sort of made and it goes out to the wider group. I suppose it's the idea is try to make it more of a bespoke cabinet arrangement in the interim, I suppose. But we want to make sure we're getting out officers' ways as best we can when it comes to some of the operational decisions and things like that might have been stuck in the 6-week cycle. But we do think that some of the decisions that have been made that would have a political would maybe benefit from a political input prior to going into print.
Thanks, Chris. I'm sure all of that will be borne in mind. Christopher McElhaney.
Provost, so my concerns with the expedited business can be highlighted through the points just made, and I guess I'll highlight them through questions. So council officials made the decision to increase the weekly payment for free school meals, but council officials also made the decision to cut the payment that we agreed families would get at Easter. Now, I agree that the free school meals should be increased, how much we're paying families, but I don't agree that we're cutting how much we're going to give families at the Easter holiday. We've just had the debate on universal credit being cut by £20. So if that had came before a committee, I would have made that point. I would have made the point that yes, increase the amount we're allocating to free school meals, but no, don't cut the payment that we agreed we would pay families and families were expecting. And I think it's wrong that council officials make that decision when that's clearly a political choice for members to make. Council officials also made the choice to increase the DMR by several hundred thousands of pounds, money that came from the Scottish Government. It should be up to elected members to make decisions on how hundreds of thousands of pounds of money are spent. It shouldn't be up to unelected officials to make those decisions. And I was just asked if the Provost agreed with that.
I'm going to ask Jared to comment on that, Christopher. Okay, Jared.
Yes, Provost, I'm grateful for that opportunity, Provost, because I completely agree with Councillor McElhaney's point, and I do agree that the officers have to work in terms of their approved policy. Now, I will obviously adopt any instructions from this council relative to the operational log. I obviously will do that, and there's no issues about that, and there's no issues about acknowledging Councillor Curley's point relative to clearly and purely operational decisions and possibly some other aspects of that. I fully accept that, and I will, of course, implement any instructions I am given. However, in response to Councillor McElhaney's point, I do have to make this issue, and this is not in terms of contest or conflict whatsoever, it's in terms of explanation. First off, I'm probably not the best person to speak about free school meals. However, I don't think that there is actually a cut in free school meals at Easter. I think that reflects the enhanced payments that were actually supported through council approved budgets. And my last part of my answer, Provost, I think is my most relevant and perhaps most forceful, certainly is for me. The committee decided that it be delegated to officers to commit necessary expenditure from approved council budgets to fund the consequences of the operational log decisions and to allocate and to disperse any grant funding, including humanitarian assistance, as may be determined, and this is the important bit, relative to any approved policy objective of the council. And that's where all of the decisions for all of the decision log, operation log, are measured against the approved budget for approved council objectives. And Councillor McElhenney, if you will forgive me for cross-referring to him, is quite right. If officers have deviated from that, there should be an explanation. Absolutely, there should be. And that's the opportunity at the service committees or at the Policy and Resource Committee to challenge any aspect of the scrutiny log, of the operation log. However, Provost, quite clearly, I will implement any instructions of this council in terms of the operational log that I'm given. No issues about that whatsoever.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to call on Alan to, as we're verging on his area of expertise. So, Alan, can you come in now?
Thank you, Provost, and I hear what the members are saying here. The money that we're expending is money that is ring-fenced, has come from the Scottish Government and has a specific need and has to be spent by the 31st of March. That's why these decisions were made, and were made quickly, to ensure that we didn't hand this money back. The decision, just to clarify for Councillor McElhenney, on the Easter holidays, the decision that was taken wasn't about the Easter holidays, it was about the Easter holidays and the February half term that members said they would give a sum of money for. That was made before the schools were closed. Subsequent to that, the schools were closed and the February half term money was rolled up in the normal £30 a fortnight payment. So there hasn't been a cut in the Easter payment. If anything, there's been an increase in the Easter payment because we didn't reduce the members' approved payment by as much as we probably should have, if that makes sense. So hopefully that explains that there hasn't been a cut implemented by officers, that actually we're putting more money in, but it's linked to ring fences. As Jared's just been saying, this is linked to ring-fenced government grants that have to be expended by the 31st of March, hence the need for speed in dealing with them. But I'm happy, to take guidance following discussion with the Chief Executive and Jared as to how best to deal with these going forward. But we're trying to save officers like myself doing various emergency powers reports and going through that. And if we're going to do a similar process, then we might as well just keep the emergency powers reports going and getting the convener and the vice convener to sign them off, which is what I understood we're trying to avoid, because there wouldn't be a suitable committee for these matters to be considered at.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. Christopher, are you quite happy with the responses?
Provost, are you talking to me?
Tony, Councillor McElhenney.
Yeah, just to make the point that I had meant the February payment, not the Easter payment, and I would say no, I'm not content, because I don't think that seeking emergency powers authority is that arduous a task. We're really talking about a senior officer generating one document and circulating it to 4 senior members of the council, who I'm pretty sure are more than capable of returning that within a 24-hour period. I think that'd be much better for scrutiny and it's much more democratic.
Thanks very much, Christopher. I'm now going to move on to Stephen McKay. Stephen.
I'd essentially like to come in on the point earlier that Councillor Rebecca had raised, but just in terms of this particular issue, I think we just need to understand the significant pressure that officers are under at this point in time. And there is often a degree of political consultation, not necessarily through the formal powers mechanism, but there is a degree of consultation. But if there are concerns in the part of the the largest non-administration group, then I'm sure the leader of that group is able to raise these concerns at our regular meetings with the Chief Executive and the regular meetings with me, and we can have a discussion about this.
Thank you, Stephen. And Lynn has a question, a comment rather. Lynn?
Yeah, the question is in the chat, so it's pretty straightforward there. I think you know, we've recognised that we're reducing the agenda items, which is right, and I can understand that. But some of our meetings are not any shorter, so I'm just saying, is there anything to speed up? Today's probably a good example. We're nearly at 10:07 and we're not even near the end. So although our agenda items are getting shorter, but our meeting length, so is there anything that we can look at to try and reduce the time that we're actually in committee meetings?
Is there any way to expedite, for example, council meetings? Chair, you're the authority in all things meeting. Can we get the benefit of your wisdom?
Provost, through the council, we conducted the mid-term review because councillors are very focused on trying to make sure we deal with relevant business items and push them through efficiently through the council. I think actually this discussion reinforces the enormous workload and the vast range of services that councillors have a scrutiny, review and supervisory function for. It's the whole range of matters affecting the community, all the more so in the terms of COVID emergency. In the interim review, we again refreshed means to focus on business-only items and to try to use alternative means to take things away from formal committee meetings and into presentation formats and briefing documents that members could refer to at their own discretion, as opposed to at a formal meeting. So we are committed to doing that. We are committed to try to make this as effective as possible for elected members. And if you would allow me to perhaps offer this, Provost, the amount of work that goes into any council report, whether it's a council report on an agenda or even the COVID update report, there is from your officers, not just from me or from Diane or from Sharon, a massive amount of work that goes into preparing that, because you expect and you deserve quality. So you can't bring forward any report just like that, whether it's a normal report or whether even, and please forgive me for going back a little bit here, an emergency report. The same quality is demanded. What we're trying to do is to find an effective means to have those decisions dealt with effectively by officers, which I think we can in these COVID emergency times through the expedited procedures. But in response to Councillor Quinn, we have stripped back for all of the service committees the reports, and we've tried to present expedited reports that focus on business-only items, and quite understandably, quite rightly, members are actually spending time to look at that. So, Provost, I can only answer that we are taking every innovative step to be as modern as possible, to use alternative means as possible, and we are very reflective of the members' commitment in time and the officers' commitment in time, particularly during the emergency. Sometimes the business will take time to go through because you've got a number of important items, but we will always look at new ways of doing it, and that's what we've been trying to do through the expedited procedure. I think that that might develop and focus members, helpfully focus members' attention on business-only items through reports that are those brief, relevant summaries. But I would hope that members would be the final judge of that, and we'll be able to review that perhaps in the middle of the year after the COVID immediate implications. Provost, that's my only attempt at an answer, but
No,
your officers are committed to doing that.
Thanks, Chair. Very full answer. Quite happy with that, Lynn.
Yeah, it's just a point. It was not a criticism of the officers. I think the officers are doing a fantastic job to reduce it, and we should be conscious of officers' time. That's what I'm saying. So I think it's more to flip it, is what can we do as elected members to speed up this process for officers? Because I'm conscious that some of the committees are going on, and that's taking a lot of the officers' time. So yeah, so I think it's more about us as elected members examining how we could make that swifter.
Thank you. Thanks, Lynn. Jim of the McElhaney variety. Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I think it's a discipline matter, both council officers and elected members. When we get good quality reports, example, and the recommendations are for noting the report, it doesn't need to have an officer to talk through the report and then for members to analyse that report and ask questions on it. The conveners of the committees that the reports are presented to should just briefly introduce the report and then accept the recommendations, the paper's noted, and it's moved on to the next item agenda. That would speed up the committees enormously. There are far too many, we're getting bogged down talking about things and there's no decision to be made at the end of the discussion.
Yeah. Gerard, have you any comment or a footnote on Jim's question? Comment?
Provost, grateful though I am for the invite, I fear though if I do start, I might actually fall into the very trap of prolonging the meeting that you would not wish me to. So no, I cannot add anything further. Thank you, Provost.
Yeah, thanks very much. Do we agree with the recommendation?
Agreed.
Agreed? Agreed. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Next item is item number 10, and that should only take 3 or 4 hours, but it's the administrative arrangements scheme of delegation officers. You'll remember that in the last council we approved an interim management structure. This item concerns some of the consequences of that decision. Again, Gerard, would you like to start us off?
Provost, thank you. This is obviously an inherently fascinating report, Provost, and I will curtail my remarks. I assure members that there's no new powers. It's simply reflective of the interim structure that you referred to. Secondly, it takes account of the Environment Committee's, Councillor McCormick will confirm, wish to review the TRO procedure. So there's a slight amendment to the standing orders to take that power away from the council and vest it in the E&R committee. And lastly, given CMT discussions, Provost, just to alert you to this, please, that on page 38 of the main papers, paragraph 15 on page 38 of the main papers, I would simply wish to insert one word. Mr. McEwen, Tony McEwen, has powers to make grants to voluntary organisations, but I think there's an anomaly in this scheme of delegation, and we're required to make that clear. That's an emergency grant to voluntary orgs. That's only been used in the past. It's not normal. So my report stands as it is, no new powers, and the only thing that I would ask is the addition of the word additional in paragraph 15, emergency in paragraph 15, and everything is as it was before, and it is resilient for the future upon any future change to the interim management structure. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much. We have a question from David Wilson, and it's not on St Mary's, but
yeah, thank you. No. I got a knock back in St Mary's. The two of them ganged up on me. But I'd like to go to page 61, 62 and 63, please. Big page. And we have all these, I know we've had these, they used to come up every so often in the past, these various regulations that the council is responsible for. And it's a question, Gerard, for you. I know we're not that long out of Europe. In your view, do you think there might be many of these disappearing over the next few years because we don't have the bureaucracy of Europe any longer?
Provost?
Gerard, I think the question, David's question, was directed to you. It's about on page 61, in the lower third of the page, there are a number of regulations. David wants to know if our exit or Brexit will eliminate many of these regulations.
Provost, within the scheme, I have adapted the European Procurement Regulation Framework to refer to that at the other part of the scheme to take account of the exit from the European Union and the prospective alterations to the former European procurement network. That's material, that's there, and that's an update. Secondly, in terms of Councillor Wilson's questions, obviously, again, I'm going to answer that objectively without any comment about Europe, etc. These are the basic powers that that Martin requires in terms of his duties. They are largely unaffected. They are mainly powers that are extant from the UK or Scottish parliaments. If there are any changes, the changes will be reflected in any legislation or any amendment or repeal legislation. So all of those powers are current and relevant. The only addition to that is the Coronavirus Scotland power. That's for closure of premises and other regulations. And as I say, the European procurement regulations dealt with separately. I hope that is a full answer to Councillor Wilson.
Thanks very much. David, does that help you?
Gerard, that's a very full answer. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, David. Natasha, you have a question?
Sorry, no, that was a bit of a sarky comment just about, are we not getting a live reading of all the scheme of delegated powers? Sorry, yes, swear he knows when I'm about to talk. He clearly thinks it's not a good point. But no, I was just making a sarcastic comment, so I withdraw that.
Thanks very much, Natasha, for your sarcastic comment.
Provost, I will stay online at the end of the meeting, and I will start that live reading at the conclusion of remarks. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a promise. Jim McLeod.
No, I'm fine, thanks, Provost.
Fine, Jim. Right. Do we agree the recommendations?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Right. Item 11, this will warm the cockles of your heart, David. It's is on withdrawal from the European Union. An update. I would say that Martin's report focuses on the economic impact and the implications of withdrawal for Inverclyde. It has to be said that throughout you'll see COVID is muddying the waters. Martin, would you? Martin.
Thank you, Provost. What I should probably say firstly here is that I should probably be clear on what this report is and what it's not. So this report fulfills a remit from the December committee to come back to the December council to come back to council and report on any immediate impacts that we were aware of the withdrawal from the European Union. What it doesn't do is it doesn't look, and this has been brought to our attention obviously by members, it doesn't deal with the long-term aspects of the impact of changes to various different regimes, including common agricultural policy, including the European structural funds, etc. So really, this is a report, and I suppose the reason that it comes from myself is because of my responsibility for resilience, which is how we treated the no deal EU exit initially. So from that basis, what we've really done is a quick straw poll of local businesses just to see what the immediate effects have been. And I suppose what we're reporting is that the immediate effects have not been enormous. We obviously know that we have fishing vessels that will have been affected, but the effect overall has not been great because we don't have any fish processors. So I think what I'd probably say is that there probably is a need for a more thought through report looking at the long-term effects, and no doubt we'll bring that back to the council in due course. Take any questions on what's in the report.
I don't have any questions in the chat function. Do we? Who's that? Lynn.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Just a quick question. So under 5.2, it said the majority of business has been contacted so far and there's no issues arising. So do we know that that's definitely no issues, or you've had no response? So I'm just concerned in case there's been a time lag on people realising that they have an issue. So is it a no? Are we assuming if they don't respond that they've got no issue?
So what happened was that Economic Development actually did a telephone call round of the larger employers, and what this reports back is that at this point in time, none of them were reporting back, were saying to Economic Development that there were any major impacts. There are obviously some of them had concerns that there could be long-term effects, but at this point, none of those businesses were reporting anything. So it was a call round from Economic Development to check, and it was focused on the larger businesses. So it is by necessity incomplete. However, we probably will have to let the dust settle a wee bit to have a fuller answer on this.
Okay, all right. Any further questions? There's Elizabeth, you wish to make a comment?
I've put my comment in the chat, Provost, because I've had awful connection problems tonight. I am so sorry. In fact, I missed a couple of agenda items, and again, I deeply apologise for not being here for that. I could facetiously ask everybody to recap what they said, but I won't do that, obviously. But just to say that if Martin's picked up that a wider report is required, then we would certainly welcome that.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Ennis.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Yeah, I think like Liz, I would welcome a wider report. Obviously, it's been mentioned about fishing and things, but I mean, we don't have much in the way of fishing in Inverclyde these days. But we obviously have farms and farming, and you know, at least 3/4 of Inverclyde's area involves farming and the common agricultural policy. So it would be good to know in the future where that's headed. For the farmers, and not only the farmers, but the population as a whole, because obviously food is important. So food's coming in and out of Inverclyde, coming in and out of Britain is obviously important to the wider population of Inverclyde. So yes, very much welcome a report that's a bit more extensive than this.
Right, thank you very much. I think Martin has promised a future report. Is that right, Martin?
So, Provost, I think probably what it'd be best, I don't want to promise anything to the next council meeting, because we may need to, as I say, we may need to let the dust settle a little, but I will discuss with colleagues about how best members can be informed of some of the more long-term aspects and impacts on Inverclyde.
Okay. Do we agree
Provost,
with
Provost, Jim McLeod here.
Oh, Jim, sorry, I was looking. Oh, thank you again, Jim, for alerting me.
Yes, okay, Provost. Yeah, I'm a bit in agreement with Innes. I think it would be good to get a further report. I understand that obviously we're only 6 weeks or so into this new world of being away from the EU after nearly 50 years. But no, I was just wondering, there are other things here to consider. I mean, funding that the council and the third sector used to get from the likes of European Social Fund and the ERDF. I just wondered if there'd been any news about replacement for each grants, if we'd heard anything there. And the other thing, a question for the Health and Social Care Partnership, is around any medical supplies. As we know, many medicines and the likes are manufactured in Europe and other EU states, and I just wondered if we've had any notice of any shortages of any sort of medicines or treatments for people.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you. Martin, I think you can answer possibly the first part of Jim's questions.
So I'll maybe defer to Stuart if possible, as he has slightly more knowledge of this area than myself.
Through you, Provost, the replacement for the European structural funds is still under discussion and remains unresolved at this stage.
I see. Right. Thank you, Stuart. Louise, medicines supply lines, are they secure?
Through yourself, Provost, the board have had a EU Brexit kind of group for a number of years, actually. I think, and I've been working to look at the supply chain in relation to pharmacy and medication. There's nothing from that that's been reported into partnerships of any concern.
I see, nothing of any concern. Jim, does that answer your questions?
Yeah, I mean, I hope certainly that as someone who takes quite a bit of medication each day, unfortunately, I hope that certainly continues. I know it's been a concern of some other people who have raised that matter with me. And regarding the ESF, I do hope that the UK government come up with an alternative and that people don't lose out because of it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. Do we agree the recommendation? Yes, fairly unanimous. Let's move on to item 12. Now, numbers 12 to 16, I think, are all traffic regulations orders, and they have all been remitted from Environment and Regeneration. So, item 12, TRO, disabled parking spaces, are we agreed? Yes. Turning these pages as fast as I can. Item 13, the proposed agreed, right? Item 14.
Agreed.
Agreed. Done. Item 15.
Agreed.
And item 16.
Agreed.
Thank you. Now, for item 17, I'm not sure if any members of the public are watching this, but they have to be excluded from this, unfortunately, from this item. And the same applies to the press.
Mr. Provost, I can confirm that the press representative has left the meeting, so there's no public at the meeting and the press representative